All right, so we'll do a quick roll call and then we can get started. Rich Berlandy. We're not seeing Rich. Okay, Emily Rick.
I am here.
Dave Fox.
Here.
Bob Hannon.
Here.
Robert Eisner.
Here.
Mark Simpson.
Present.
Ned Satchin.
Here.
Jay Tulin.
I'm here.
And Guy Wolf.
I'm here.
Thank you. It's all yours, Bob. Mr. Hannon.
Bob, you're on mute.
Bob, you're on mute.
I'm tired.
Yeah, me too. This is
First item on the agenda is 402 Farmington Avenue, LLC, lots 40 and 40B1.
okay. I don't know. I think, are you?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
So good evening, everybody. This is Tom Daly with Milo and McBroom. Also on the line should be Megan Raymond from also with Milo and McBroom. Yep, there I see Megan, and then Kyle Richards. Where we left off was we gave you a detailed presentation at your last meeting. Then you had a field visit. My understanding you had a good turnout that day, and Megan walked the site with you and answered several of your questions. I have a short list of some outstanding housekeeping items that we had talked about. One is the commission saw an electrical box out in the wetlands, and they were or near the out in the woods, and it was questioning what it was. Metro Realty did a kind of crazy little investigation. They found the electrical box, got an electrician out there. Actually, it was not live. Then they went over nearby and kicked some leaves and found a manhole with some piping in it. And then they chased that piping across the way, and it appears to head towards an old hydrant at the back of the Yukon Genome facility with a big sign on it saying this doesn't work. So it might have been, yeah, and the electrical doesn't work. So I don't know. I don't know the history of this piece. I don't know if it was all part of the same parcel. That used to be a manufacturing facility. Maybe they needed a hydrant before water came up Route 4, but it's, it's just some old stuff in the woods, and we'll abandon that as part of our work. But everything we found was that it was not connected or not operational. So we'll take care of that. But that was a little bit of a witch hunt, but we got to the end of it. In addition to that is there was some questions about the watershed and how it flowed. We did do some further investigation of that. The wetlands, clearly, I was mistaken. It's so flat out there, sometimes it's hard to see. But it does flow from a south to north. So it's a large wetland, ultimately goes behind Yukon, and then it really gets pinched in. There's a large outlet control structure, goes underneath the road that goes to the condos, and then daylights into a drainage ditch that runs for right on the side of the road, and it's really pinched in between the road and the slope coming down. Ultimately, goes to a pipe and then shoots east towards Route 4, which ultimately apparently probably gets to the wetlands on the Yukon property, and then ultimately potentially that pond in the Yukon property. I kind of lost it through there, but that's what it kind of does. Even considering how big the wetland was and how wet it's been, it was flowing today, but I wouldn't say it was a lot of water considering how big. So I think a lot of the water just sits in that wetlands, and I think Megan, based upon her investigation out there, concurred. In addition to that, there was some I have reviewed Shannon's comments and concur with those, as if the commission feels inclined to put those as conditions of approval. We will be adding, there's that one catch basin on the road, comes off a quarry road that one of the commissions noted it didn't seem to be routed through the water quality chamber. What we're probably going to propose there is a dual water sediment chamber slash catch basin. It's basically a 2-chamber system. Sometimes it's been called a Glastonbury structure, but we're going to propose that there. And then Shannon also indicated there was some discussion about the garages and their location. We believe we've located the garages in an appropriate location. They're at least 100 feet off the wetlands, but we do agree with Shannon's recommendation that we would seal the garages, the floors of those garages, just like this commission requested we did on Colt Highway. So we're willing to agree to that. In addition to that, we have also reviewed Bruce Sears' comments, and we will work our way through those. He acknowledges and said there's no objection to those being conditions of approval. We'll be wrapping those up into our planning and zoning process. So with that, that's kind of where I think we left off. But as I said, Kyle Richards and Megan Raymond are on the phone, and myself, we're more than happy to answer any questions the commission may have.
Well, going in our typical order, I've got to bypass Rich, and we'll start with Emily if she has any
Actually,
questions.
Bob, Rich signed on
Okay.
a few minutes ago, so he is on the phone now.
Okay, well, then we'll let Rich start.
Hold on.
No questions.
Okay,
Thank you.
Emily,
I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Dave,
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up briefly on that, the hydrodynamic separator from the Quarry Road drainage area. There are, I guess, 3 catch basins on Quarry Road. So there would be something placed in the last of those 3 basins in order to provide some treatment before it gets into the sedimentation basin. Is that correct?
That is correct. Instead of a hydrodynamic separator, because it's a small watershed, we're proposing a sediment chamber. So it'll be a 2-chamber system, and it'll basically be right at the catch basin. So to clean it, you just come up the road and you'll be able to suck it right out. So it'll be in that last catch basin just before it connects with the rest of the system.
Okay.
Correct. You're correct. Yes.
Okay, that sounds good. And, you know, I really like what you've done with the whole stormwater system, the series of basins and whatnot. I was just curious, what frequency storm would lead to the overflow in a direct discharge?
Well, every storm will have some discharge. So the basins are sized for the 2 through the 100-year storm. So we did analysis and determined what the pre-existing and the proposed flows are. Thank you, Shannon. So the basin will actually have discharges at all storms. So water will always be feeding into that wetlands. But if you can see at the top of the chart, we have existing and proposed, and we're trying to match those all the way through the 100-year storm. So there will actually be no uncontrolled overflow up to the 100-year storm. It'll be a metered flow into the wetlands.
Oh, okay. I just saw that overflow at the second basin.
Yeah, and when
there was no discharge into the
and when we call it overflow, it's really an emergency overflow. Say I don't know, do we get a 200-year storm? I don't know, or the pipe was clogged or something like that. We have an area where it can still release and not cause damage.
Oh, okay. But there will be a metered release.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And we have sized this these basins using the new NOAA, the higher rainfall rates that came out a couple of years ago.
That's a good move. Thank you. That's all I have.
Robert?
Yeah, so Tom, thanks for the presentation. It sounds like you're agreeable to the pre-drafted conditions that staff had put together. And then you also mentioned you were working on comments from Bruce Sear. I may have missed those, Shannon. What are the extent of those comments? I'm not sure that I know what those were.
I'm not sure if I forwarded them. They're mostly zoning related, because this was submitted and prepped for the wetlands submission, but Bruce tries to make sure that the comments are comprehensive and includes TPZ and wetland issues. I think he had a few questions that were drainage related, but nothing that's insurmountable.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure that because you send a lot of information, I don't always get through all of it before the meeting, so it
Yeah,
sounds,
I've had a lot coming in too, so I may have missed getting that out to you folks. So it's entirely possible that's on me.
I thought so. I think it might have came out just before the holiday. So,
okay, thank you.
might have
Matt.
And then, given that there is a fairly significant wetland in close proximity to development site, I would also suggest maybe we add in a condition for a pre-construction meeting so that should the project be approved before the site activity occurs, that there's a meeting with the field workers and our staff so that we can protect the sensitive areas up front rather than having site construction take place and miss that opportunity. So I think that would be another condition I'd like to see. And then for discussion would be, we talked at the last meeting and looked at in the field the potential to move the one garage that's in the lower left of the site plan. I'm not sure the orientation. Yeah, that garage, could that garage be slid, I guess it would be to the north, to move it out of the regulated area or minimize the building within the regulated area? Tom, is that something that was looked at?
you know, we did talk with the Metro. They felt strongly about the location, and then with Shannon's comment about sealing the garages, we had hoped that would address the concerns of the commission.
And
Okay.
This is Kyle Richards. I can add to that from Metro Realty, for the record, we're very specific with respect to the rules and regulations of these communities, and there's nothing that would occur in those garages that will be prohibited, not be prohibited, that can occur elsewhere on a surface parking spot. So there's no hazardous material storage, no storage of accelerants, no automotive repairs are permitted in any of the garages. And so you could be assured that anything that occurs in a surface space will be consistent with what is permitted to occur in a garage.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. And I understand sort of for the convenience of the residents and the aesthetics and the layout, why the building is placed where it is. I think from a commissioner's standpoint, it would be preferable if we could minimize the amount of construction within the 150-foot regulated area. It's not to say that that can't occur, but I think it's a fair point for discussion amongst the commission. And that ends my comments. Thanks.
Mark?
I have no questions. The site visit resolves my concerns about the vernal pools and the proximity of where the development was going to be taking place. So I have no further comments.
Ed?
Going back to the garages, I understand that the placement is important to, the resident, your resident doesn't want to walk too far. But you were gonna put a concrete sealer on the one that's in there. Can we include a concrete sealer on the one that's just outside of the 150 foot?
Yes, and I think Shannon actually made that a recommendation, if I'm wrong.
Okay.
No, she said with one, just the garage. Yeah, we have no objection to do both of them.
Right.
Okay. And I wanted to clarify. So when we're out in the site walk, the existing pipes that are under Quarry Road right now, those are going to remain as is, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, because the placement seemed to be working out well with they were a little bit above the vernal pool, the usual vernal pool elevation, and so they're allowing the water to stockpile in the vernal pool, and so I want to make sure those weren't disturbed.
Yes, we're gonna luckily, the previous developer stubbed all the utilities, so really our work on Quarry Road is pretty minimal.
Okay. Yeah, my only concern was the catch basins that are being installed, and it seems like you've addressed those, and so that's all that I have for questions.
Thanks. Ned? I'm sorry, Jay.
I don't have any question. Actually, Dave answered and someone from their Tom or whoever it was answered the question I had about the vernal pool and the stormwater runoff. So I'm good. Thank you.
Guy?
I support Commissioner Eisner's concern about that one garage. I'm wondering why they said it was kind of an aesthetic thing that they want them separated like that. Why they can't move them closer together. And I don't know if that's going to solve the problem though. That's all I have.
Okay. I really don't have any comments. I wasn't able to make the site visit for various reasons, but I really don't have any comments. It sounds like people are pretty satisfied with some of the work that's been at least offered as far as addressing some of the issues maybe raised on the site walk. So I'll just leave it at that. My understanding is that the application was accepted at the first meeting in November, correct?
Yes.
And at that point in time, there was no determination of significance at that point in time?
Correct.
Okay, so that's one of the things that we would need to vote on today. So maybe just quickly go around and check with everybody to see whether it's a significant or non-significant activity. So Rich,
I would say non-significant.
Emily,
I'll go with Rich.
Dave,
Join the crowd.
Robert,
I'm not going to make it easy. I think that it's a significant development adjacent to a significant wetland track, including a vernal pool. And while there's been good efforts by the developer to move a lot of the activity or keep a lot of the activity out of the 150-foot buffer area, there still is at least one structure. There's a fair amount of paving. There's going to be a lot of drainage. So I think that there is a potential impact on a significant wetland and vernal pool. So I would lean towards it's a significant regulated activity.
okay. Mark,
I would repeat the same thing that was just said. The vernal pools, we got to be very careful about development around them, and there's no harm brought to them.
okay. Ned,
Well, I mean, this is a very significant project, but the effect on the area in the upland review is kind of minimal, and with no work being done on the pipes that go under Quarry Road now, and the vernal pool, you know, is going to be saved from any kind of construction in that area. I don't think it is significant at this time. Plus, they had the runoff control wall going up on the, I think it's the northwest side of the property, that I think is going to help a lot too. Yeah. So I kind of really could be convinced either way on this, but right now I'm leaning towards that it is non-significant based on the 100-foot line, 150-foot line.
okay. Jay,
I actually kind of go along with what Robert and Mark said. I was kind of thinking that, and I wanted to hear what everyone else had to say. So I can be convinced either way, but I think I'm leaning towards significance myself as well.
okay. Guy,
I agree with Commissioner Eisner, so I'm in favor of significant.
okay. So we have 7 members. So Rich and Emily are not voting on this one. I think it's just Dave, Robert, Mark, Ned, Jay, Guy, and myself. Because we're 7 with wetlands, so we have a full boat tonight. So does somebody want to make a motion to determine this as a significant activity? Because that's,
I would make
I think, where we're leaning.
This is Robert. I would make a motion that this proposed activity is a significant activity.
Is there a
This is
second?
I second that.
Okay, those in favor of this being addressed as a significant activity, say aye.
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 This is
Aye.
Ned. I'm gonna go along with that and I'll say yes.
Opposed? So we have a 7-0 vote. I think, I'm not sure I heard you, Dave, but I'm assuming that you didn't voice up with a no.
I flipped my vote as well.
Okay, so it's a 7-0 vote. Okay,
And Mr. Chairman, I just want to get clear. I'm not opposed to the project, but I think it's just the procedural aspect as to the level of activity.
well, that I think is understood, and I think your comments were taken that way. But again, just because we may not have an issue with the project, it doesn't mean that that renders it automatically an insignificant activity. So,
Thank you.
so I think that's all we need on this right now, Shannon, right?
Correct, because it'll have to go to public hearing in
We
January.
don't have to vote on the application because we need the hearing.
You need the hearing, so you can't vote on the application. So it'll have to go to
Okay.
hearing in January.
All right.
Okay.
Let's see. Eventually I'll find it again in my papers here. Next
Excuse me.
item on the agenda is 15 Pond Street show cause hearing.
Excuse
Yeah.
me, Bob. I had a question. We haven't
Yeah.
done a public, have we done a public hearing since we've started the Zoom meetings?
No.
I'm not sure if you folks have, but I do them all the time for TPZ, so.
Okay.
And I do them for the siting council. It's not an issue. I mean, technically,
Okay.
it's just, I mean, the thing about it, my understanding is people would need to be able to sign up early to speak, correct? Is that how you do it, Shannon?
It's, yeah, no, I'll get you, when we're ready to, we've got a long night tonight.
Okay.
Me,
All right.
If you want, go watch a TPZ meeting, but we've got it well under control.
Okay.
So, yeah, it works. We do it for Historic District, Unionville and Farmington, TPZ, ZBA, and it works just fine. So,
Yeah, 'cause
Okay. Thank you.
they're required to have a lot of hearings. It's in the fine print.
yeah.
All righty.
So, but, yeah, if there's time at the end of the night, I'm happy to walk through that. So I believe Ian Cole is on the phone. Ian, if you're available and want to.
I am here. I am here. Good evening, everybody. For the record, Ian Cole, soil scientist, wetland scientist, Middletown, Connecticut. I'm here tonight on behalf of Miss Lambert to go over the proposed restoration plan for restoring and enhancing the wetlands that were the subject of the cease and desist order for a conduct of regulated activity without a permit. The plan before you essentially is the formalized version of the proposed recommendations as we discussed at the October 21st meeting a little over a month ago, and really kind of in going over the plan from a high level, the primary focus of the restoration plan is to take advantage and enhance the water quality functions of the swale that runs through that small wetland. The beneficial sections of the wetland are the inflow path, and we're going to improve upon the existing wetlands that were disturbed by stabilizing the channel flow of the path and providing a dense herbaceous vegetation layer via seed mixtures and herbaceous plugs. As outlined in the letter that you have before you, are 19 basically action items for the commission's consideration to include as a condition of finalizing the cease and desist order. The first action item was something that was actually already completed and we had discussed at the last meeting. Ms. Lambert had a stockpile of conservation hay bales on site. So we directed her to use those to spread evenly over the property where she had some exposed soil from the vegetation removal. That was completed and was satisfactory. They did a really good job. They left an inflow path for the very shallow swale. So it's looking nice and stabilized for the winter time. So from a high level perspective, a lot of the recommendations are our typical boilerplate kind of stuff where we discuss, no driving machinery into the wetland. This can all be accomplished with the use of hand tools. We discuss about no chipping or processing any woody material will occur or deposited within the wetlands. We discuss about limiting ground disturbance by leaving the stumps of the trees in place. And we discuss where needed. If there's ruts when we come into the seeding during the springtime, those ruts would be raked out to the previously undisturbed forest floor elevations. When we come in the springtime, we're going to evaluate the inflow path of the stream. It's fairly well established now, and it's a very shallow swale. So if it does need any kind of help being roughed in, that could be done with hand tools to match the existing swale elevations, up gradient and down gradient. In the plan, I had discussed with Ms. Lambert about sourcing all of the plant materials and erosion control materials, at the typical source of New England wetland plants up in South Hadley, Massachusetts. They kind of really getting into the details of what the restoration is. There's essentially 3 zones. So there's the lower stretch. Shannon, if you want, if we scroll down to page 6 out of 11, there's kind of a cartoon graphic. So there's really essentially 3 zones that we're focusing on. The lower zone, which is the establishment of the swale, where we're going to improve upon the water quality functions. This is where the topography kind of levels out a little bit before it ultimately reaches what was an engineered kind of plunge pool right before the culvert. In this area, what we're proposing essentially is laying down a seed mixture of erosion mix and wildflower mix to establish ground cover. We would then take a high erosion control biodegradable blanket that can tolerate flow. We would overlay that over over the seed. And then within that biodegradable blanket, we would just push right into the blanket 2-inch plugs. We have a schedule here of 4 different species for plugs that are 5 species of plugs that we would use. Essentially, we're going to get 4 trays. They come in packs of 50 in a tray, and they're super easy to install. And they'll help that area grow like wildfire in the spring. The second kind of target area is the up gradient riparian zone adjacent to the swale. So within the wetland proper, where you have your cursor there, we're going to put a conservation seed mix on the ground, lay down some straw hay mulch on top of that, and then we're proposing 6 native shrub species that are recruited from the up gradient undisturbed wetland. So spicebush and silky dogwood shrubs are up gradient. We're going to use those species to plant in that area. And then the third kind of zone of restoration is between the wetland and the fill area. This is essentially the upland review area. In this area, again, we're going to put down a conservation seed mix for ground cover. And then along the limits of the fill that we're leaving, we're going to plant 6 shrubs, a combination of shadblow and witch hazel, to really kind of establish more or less a soft natural barrier to prevent any future encroachments that may potentially happen if somebody went crazy with the weed whacker. And then, finally, once we get through the restoration plantings, we'll now enter into the monitoring phase of things. This will have the standard 2 years of monitoring with reporting due by December 15th of each year. And we'll have the typical success standards where, all plants within the restoration area will be alive and healthy following the completion of 2 growing seasons. And the success standard number 2 of no invasive plants shall recolonize the restoration area. So that's the plan in a nutshell. And I'll be working with Ms. Lambert in the springtime, providing oversight and working with town staff. Once we secure that material, before it was installed, town staff would be contacted, have their concurrence on the layout and okayance of the materials that we have secured, and then it would be installed and reported back to the commission. So if anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Go back to Rich, start with you.
No, no questions. This looks like a good plan.
Emily?
I have nothing at this time. It is clear. It's easy to follow. I'm very pleased with this. Thank you.
Dave?
Yeah, it looks like a well thought out plan, and it's really nicely presented in the letter. I was wondering if anybody had seen the property after the deluge of Monday, and whether that straw is still around or has it been swept away already.
I have not been since that deluge. I will say that it is a quick flashy area, and they did leave an in-stream flow path. So my guess is that it's still largely confined to the swale. There was quite a bit of hay they spread. So I would, sight unseen, I would assume that a fair amount of that is still in place.
All right, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Thanks, that's all I have.
Robert?
I agree that I think it's a well thought out and appropriate restoration plan for the work that was done. So Ian, I appreciate the effort you put into the plan. You covered all the typical things that we'd be looking for discussion with the rest of the commission. I'd be looking to hopefully be able to clear this from the agenda and just leave it that any additional work needed after the spring assessment and the annual reports that we get be left to the discretion of the staff. I don't think we need to hold this open for the period of the monitoring. And then the last comment that I have, I guess, would be for Shannon, and that would just to be, is there any update on the status of the construction bond? I know you had started to look into it. It was not something that could be used towards the restoration work, but I'm just wondering if that bond is still held by the town or if it was released.
We're still holding it.
Okay, good. It's the end of my comments.
Okay. Mark?
I have no comments. Everyone else has said what they need to say.
Okay. Ned?
Yeah, I think it's a very well thought out plan, and I think Ian did a good job on this. And I'm a little concerned. I think normally what we do on these is we wait until the initial planting is done, and then we kind of consider it closed out. So I'm not sure if we want to close it out now, or, I mean, I understand the town staff can handle it, but usually we wait, I think, until the plantings are done.
I'll report back in the spring. So I think, if I understood correctly, I think the intent is that obviously there aren't any updates to provide, and there isn't any expectation that there'll be updates between now and April.
Right.
The planting takes place, so it'll clear from the agenda for now, and then in April, it'll go in. We'll provide you some photos so that you know what's been done in the establishment, and I'll just provide a brief update And unless there's a concern or something needs to change, there probably isn't any need to have Ian or the homeowner on. The update can come from myself in the spring. If I understand the intent correctly.
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay.
Jay?
I don't have any questions, and I'd agree with everyone else. I think it's a well thought out plan, and I'd have no questions. Thanks.
Guy?
I echo that sentiment.
Okay, I do have one question for the biodegradable erosion control blankets that are going down.
Yep.
What material is being used for the mesh on that?
So there is a specification. It calls out for a very specific blanket that New England Wetland Plants offers, which is known as a ES1 single net straw rolled erosion control blanket. That's typically used for this type of application. So I don't have the exact spec in here, but it's all natural fibers. It's used for sensitive areas, that's, doesn't have that plastic netting underneath that acts as a trap for amphibians and things of that nature. So
that answered my question. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't a plastic mesh.
Yeah, no, it is not.
Okay, no, that's fine. I mean, and I agree with everybody else. I think this is going to be relatively simple. It's straightforward, easy to understand. So I don't really have any issues, but I did want to get that clarified as far as the erosion control blankets. So what do we need to do on this one now, Shannon?
If you want to do a vote to approve the plan as presented, and then I will, and allow me to continue to do the follow-up as we discussed just a moment ago. But if you're satisfied, you can approve the plan as presented, and it'd be helpful to have a vote.
Based on what I'm hearing, I would say that we're at that point. So would somebody care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the plan noted, and that we would get an update in the springtime after all the installation of all the plantings.
And
This is Jay. I'll second.
okay,
Jay, I'll second that.
Keep us informed with the updates.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. Are there any comments on this?
Yeah.
Okay, so those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstaining? That's one off the list.
Okey doke.
Thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
well.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you. Good job.
Okay. Next, I don't think Rob DiTomaso is on the call. I'm not seeing him.
For the 1200 New Britain Avenue?
1200 New Britain Avenue. Yeah, so it took a couple of emails from Bruce and I, but Mr. DiTomaso has secured his surveyor to stake out the property line and conservation easement as was requested at the last meeting. The surveyor is scheduled to do it on December 10th. Bruce and I are scheduled to be out there on December 11th to review the property line, the stakeout encroachments, and proceed with the oversight that was discussed at the last meeting. So we'll look at that and ensure that material is removed accordingly, and then basically reconvene in the spring.
Would you anticipate them putting in the medallions at that point in time, or are they just marking the edge of the conservation area?
Right now, we just wanted the area marked out so we could exactly where the property line is and understand any encroachments that may have taken place within the breadth of the conservation easement area. They will have to, I believe we discussed, go back as a condition in the spring and actually get those medallions in, but I think we've got to get a better handle on the extent of the encroachments that's taken place. So to have that marked out was going to be critical to understanding whether it was wetland or upland area where the encroachments were taking place. Okay, you've got to unmute yourself, Bob.
So we're not taking any action on this one right now.
No, no, so just an update for you. So we can move to 1179.
Sounds like a plan.
And I have, I may have just been closing this by accident. I believe Ed Pollack is on the phone.
Yes.
All right. And we have Ed's report here. So I believe, so Bob, what I was planning on doing, and obviously if you'd want to do something different, we can certainly do that. But Ed completed his report in early November. We had to adjourn the matter from the November meeting in order to accommodate the owner. So while the commission has had the report, we haven't heard from Ed directly regarding his investigation, his findings, and a summation of his report. So I thought in order to do things in order, it would be helpful to hear from Ed and get a summary of his thoughts and findings with respect to the report. I know the owner and his consultants are on the line as well this evening. And also what was submitted and I shared with the commission was an updated survey plan and an updated mitigation and restoration plan that had been provided right around the Thanksgiving holiday time. So after we've heard from Ed and the commission's had an opportunity to have any questions and discussions, thought we'd go then to the owner to hear from them regarding the revised mitigation plan, and then can open it up for further discussion at that point. So if you're agreeable, that's how I thought we would proceed.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a logical approach.
Okey-doke. All right, so Ed, it's your show. I've got your memo up on the screen, and I've got various aerials and maps we can use if needed, but I figured we'd start with your memo, and then if there's anything else that that you'd like for reference, I can try and get that up on the screen for you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sharon. I assume you folks can see and hear me. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
Great. Okay. Good evening, commissioners. As you know, my name is Ed Pollack. I'm a registered soil scientist, certified professional wetland scientist, and owner of Connecticut Ecosystems. And I was retained by the town of Farmington Wetland Commission to review this cease and desist order. I think I can go pretty quickly through the highlights of this November 2nd letter and then answer any questions you may have. I did inspect the subject site on multiple occasions, including with Mr. George Logan, my colleague. I went on my own, accompanied by one of the employees of the company that owns the property. And as you know, I accompanied the commission in November, on a Sunday morning in November, to more or less for orientation purposes, to point out the highlights of the site. So the points that I make in my November 2nd letter: number one, the subject site has a complex and long-lasting history of soil disturbance. It's probably very difficult or impossible to find any natural undisturbed soils within the 4.6 acre subject site. You know, that goes back many decades before there were even wetland regulations. So that those soil disturbances would include excavations, grading, filling, and so the subject site has undergone some very significant alterations. So the soils are a product of that long history, including the most recent filling and grading that occurred earlier this year on what the REMA letter is referred to as the subject site, that 4.6 acres. To my knowledge, the property owner has not provided an explanation for or rationale for that large amount of soil disturbance that occurred on the subject site earlier this year. And it's important for the commission in determining whether that disturbance to regulated areas was avoidable and whether a feasible and prudent alternative existed to those regulated areas. But I'm not aware of an explanation of why these regulated activities were carried out earlier this year. The REMA letters, which I reviewed, state that the property owner could not have been aware of the presence of regulated wetlands and watercourses on the subject site prior to that large soil disturbance, because the USDA NRCS soils map does not show a wetland or watercourse in this area. But it's important for the commission to know that the soil survey maps are intended as broad brush planning tools. They're not intended for interpretation on individual sites, individual properties, and they're not intended to be a substitute or a replacement for a detailed, intensive investigation of the soils on a property by a qualified soil scientist for the presence of regulated wetlands or watercourses. So, you know, in my many years of working in Connecticut as a consulting wetland scientist, the most common phone call that I received was from landowners, from very small single lot landowners to owners of hundreds of acres, asking me to go out and determine if there are wetlands and watercourses on the property. So it's very, very common practice. So a qualified soil scientist would have determined that wetlands were present, but that request was not made. The REMA letter also states that the wetland A, that was partially filled, it appeared terrestrial at the time of the regrading or the grading, but the photos that I reviewed on the Town of Farmington SharePoint website clearly show inundation right at the edge of fill in what was later delineated as wetland A. So, you know, there was standing water present. There were at least hints to a non-soil scientist that this might be a regulated area. I did review the delineation of wetland A that REMA performed, and I found it to be accurate. REMA correctly applied the watercourse definition of wetlands, which is found in the state statute. And that's appropriate here because although, because of the continued disturbance on this property that I earlier mentioned, the soils are quite young, and they have not had time to develop redoxomorphic features that are typical of poorly drained or very poorly drained soils. So you wouldn't expect that in young soils like this. But I would expect that over time, given the hydrology that I've observed in wetland A, which included watermarks on trees and shrubs up to 10 inches above the soil surface, as well as ponding in the center of that wetland A. And each time that I was out there, I would expect that at least in the areas that are subject to that seasonal inundation, that those poorly drained soil redoxomorphic conditions would develop. They're there, but not very well expressed because of the short duration of duration of the time that those soils have been there. There was a feasible and prudent alternative to that, the regulated activity that occurred out there, and that would be simply not to carry it out. There was no rationale given that these activities, regulated activities, could not have been avoided. The mitigation plan has been revised, so I'm going to withhold item number 7 because I hope I'll have an opportunity to speak a little bit more about the revised mitigation plan, but item number 7 dealt with the prior plan, which has now been revised. I did point out in item number 8 in my letter that evidence contained within the REMA letters indicate that it is feasible, in fact, to restore the filled portion of wetland A. REMA letters argued that it would be difficult to restore the hydrology of the filled area because of a thin layer of compact subsoil. But the soil trench data contained in the REMA letters shows that that compact subsoil fill material is 3 feet plus thick, and it's still there. It was not removed during the filling activity or the grading activity. So that compact subsoil, which is likely responsible for the perched water table that creates the hydrology of wetland A, it is present. And if you remove the fill material from that was placed over wetland A, and perhaps over excavate a bit and place perhaps 6 inches of topsoil, good clean topsoil down, you'd have the conditions for restoring wetland A. So I do believe that that is feasible. Item number 9, I speak to the disturbance of the upland review area associated with wetland A, and perhaps Shannon, you might turn to one of my photographs, which shows the upland review area adjacent to wetland A. That was photo number 1. You can see this is the fill area immediately north of and adjacent to wetland A. It's really quite sparsely vegetated. There's more exposed sandy fill soil than there is vegetation. And as you recall, when we walked this area in November, I pointed out some of the real erosion gullies that have developed in these unvegetated soils. So, and if you look at the aerial photographs in some of the REMA letters of this area prior to this disturbance, you see that it's all green and it supports herbaceous plants, shrubs, and trees, but that's all been removed and it's been largely replaced with this waste area. So there's a significant alteration of that upland review area. I did recommend on that site walk with the commission that erosion controls be installed at the toe of slope of this fill area. Perhaps the owner will be able to speak to whether that was done. I do hope those were installed to prevent sediments from eroding down into wetland A. Item number 10, I note that as a result of the inundation that characterizes wetland A, and further to the west, wetland B, which I believe is shown in photo number 2. The shallow inundation, actually in wetland B, it's 24 up to 24 inches, supports the development or breeding and development of amphibians. And I note in some of the materials I reviewed, both the REMA letter and Shannon Rutherford's photos on the town website, amphibian tadpoles were present in both of those wetlands, and I think they were identified as American toad. So these two wetlands, as well as a not yet delineated depressional area, which is shown in photo number 4. This is an area of trapped water that lies to the west of wetland B. And if you'll recall, we looked at this area of trapped water during our November site inspection. This may very well support the breeding and development of amphibians also. I recommended in my letter that this area be investigated and to determine whether it is a regulated area, either as a wetland or a watercourse. And the fact that it was the result of earth movement, earthwork, and fill placement really doesn't matter. It's just a question of does it meet the regulatory criteria for a wetland or a watercourse. And then finally, item number 11, lacking evidence to the contrary, I think the commission has to assume that the four small isolated wetland pockets that were previously delineated on the property back in 2012 during the development of the adjacent temple property, that those four previously delineated wetland pockets were still wetlands at the time that they were filled earlier this year, and that that filling should be compensated for in an overall mitigation plan. So that concludes, a summary of my letter. If you have any questions for me at this time, I'd be happy to answer. And again, I hope I'll have an opportunity to speak with some comments on the revised mitigation plan once it's been presented by the applicant.
Thank you. Rich, any comments, questions?
Not at this time.
Emily?
Yeah, I'm interested in the redoxamorphic soil features. You addressed at the very beginning as a recovering ecologist. I was looking through your report trying to find any images that would show me what you observed there. Am I missing them just because I'm trying to look? And I may have more questions later, but I will only know that.
Oh my God.
I'll wait for that to stop.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Thanks for that question. That's a good question.
It's possible I missed them in all of the documents you sent.
Right. I did not include a photo of them. I referenced them in my letter. What I was speaking to specifically was grayish soil matrix, as well as bright, what we refer to colloquially as models, bright models. Both of those indicate within a wetland, indicate a seasonal high water table and then the lowering of that water table. So as a soil scientist has to determine whether those features were formed in place or not, or whether they were brought in from and created somewhere else and brought in, as well as whether they're created by a seasonal high fluctuating high water table. Particularly grayish soil colors can be the result of just the parent material. So you do have to do more investigating than just looking for those. But those are the classic redox features that soil scientists look for in delineating wetlands. I believe the REMA, one of the REMA letters does include an auger, several augers full of grayish soil.
Okay.
You can see that those bright redox models.
We do have that, and I just couldn't spot it. All right.
That, Emily, was posted on the SharePoint site. So all the documents, because there were so many, there was a SharePoint site and I sent the link. I'm happy to send that again to you tomorrow if you'd like.
No, I'll find it back in my everything. I wasn't sure if I had a question or not, and I'll have a better question once I've spent more time looking. So I'll defer after that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dave?
I guess really no questions, just a couple of observations. Thank you, Ed. I thought it was an excellently done report. I particularly like the fact that you pointed out that there's been no rationale for this earth-moving activity. I haven't heard it either. And also use of the NRCS maps. In my former life at DEP, we would do preliminary site reviews for people. And one of the things we would always provide would be the NRCS map, but we actually had a standard paragraph that said you should get a soil scientist to go out and look at the site. So I must have submitted those comments hundreds of times over my 30 years. So thank you for the nice report. I'll probably have some further questions as we keep on going.
Robert?
Yeah, I too want to extend my thanks to Ed. I thought he did a nice job with the report. Took in a lot of information and packaged it in a way that was easy to follow and synthesized a lot of complex issues into things that were very easy to understand. I think from a commissioner's standpoint, the report helps answer a lot of the questions that we had and the reason why we engaged with a professional to help us. And just like Commissioner Fox noted, unfortunately, the report affirms what we had talked about through many meetings, is that there is no explanation as to why this occurred. I think we can continue to speculate the reason why for development purposes, I think is the obvious speculation. I like the point in the letter as to whether the developer could or should have reasonably known. And I think from the years that I've spent on the commission, companies that are in the business of managing land and developing land must have reasonably known, given the proximity to the Farmington River, given the obvious wetlands on the property, giving the mapping as a strong indicator. In my mind, it was clear that there were too many indicators for the owner not to have known or reasonably known that there were regulated activities being conducted. And I think that goes into the point also that Ed included his report that it's, there was a feasible and prudent alternative, and that was not to engage in that activity without first obtaining the requisite approval. And the last key point that I took from the report is I think there is, as we look forward, I think there is a difference between restoration and mitigation. So I'm going to be looking towards maximizing restoration. I think the point made by Ed Pollack about the assumption that the 4 pocket wetlands that were previously identified and have been filled, I think that's the assumption that should be made. I don't think there's a lot of value in looking to restore those areas. So those 4 areas could be offset with mitigation, but to the extent that there are areas that have been harmed and damaged, those areas should be the subject of a comprehensive restoration plan. And that's all I have for comments.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, Ed, I have one question. Being on these Zoom meetings, sometimes you're not too sure what you heard. In your discussion you just gave us, did you at one time say something about before you get the call, hey, come out and check out wetlands, see if I have wetlands? Did you say that it might have been possible that the property owner did not know the area, especially around, I would think, wetlands A was not wetland, didn't have an idea it was wetlands when they started doing the moving of the fill? Did I hear that right?
No. I guess I made 2 comments in that regard. The first was that the landowner has an obligation to retain the services of a qualified soil scientist to determine the presence of wetlands and watercourses on a property. I agree, especially large property owners. I think that they all property owners should be familiar, but I tend to look at like just an small individual homeowner who isn't familiar with the wetland regulations and doesn't has never encountered a wetland regulation and didn't know that the trees they cut down were in a wetland. I think that an expectation of knowledge of wetland regulations is different with that homeowner than with a property owner of hundreds of acres in, a property that was, in excavation in the past. That just has to be an expectation that they would have the resources to know that there are wetland regulations, and that filling of wetlands is not permitted without a permit. But finally, I guess I took issue with the comment in one of the REMA letters that the wetland day appeared terrestrial at the time of the filling, and that so that the landowner would not have suspected that it was a wetland. But there are photos that are on that town of Farmington SharePoint site that clearly show inundation right up to the edge of the fill, and that inundation saturating into the fill material, which suggests that it was there at the time of the filling. So at least the photo evidence suggests that there was surface water there at the time that the fill was placed. So I just don't think there's any. I don't think that there could be any reason given for not knowing that there was there were wetlands on that property at the time the filling was done.
I agree, because we've been out there twice, and I know the town staff has been there multiple times. And even though the first time we visited, it was time, I think, before the rain started coming in, and heavy rains. And I think after a dry summer, there still was water showing there. So yeah, I'm a little probably thinking anybody who's in the business and owns property would have known that they should not have even thought about going near that area, or at least ask somebody, either townwide or somebody like yourself, to come in before they did any action. That what we saw there with the picture, I think, that whole area there, how they filled and leading down to the Wetlands A, it's just, to me, it's astounding that that somebody would not think it's not a place you should be disturbing. That's all I can say. I just want to clarify. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Ned?
Yeah, at the risk of being repetitive, I'll also voice my concern about that we still haven't been provided an explanation or rationale for the tremendous amount of soil that was moved and deposited, and it's just I just don't know why it was done, and that troubles me as to how we're going to figure this out if we don't know why it was done. But the other question I have, and I don't know, I'm not sure how to ask it, but I'll try. So, on the SharePoint, there's a series of historic photos of this area. And the area has been through a tremendous amount of, different uses. I mean, look, the original one is from the 50s, and it shows how narrow the Farmington River was at that time in this area, and that how it's been dredged and harvested for sand, and there's been a lot of work done in this area. And so my question from that is, when you have an area that's been through so many changes like that, Ted, does that affect the quality of the wetlands in this area? Is it, or, I mean, because obviously, it hasn't been here for a long time. It's been a while, but there's been so many changes in use and actually, size of the pond and size of the river. And I'm just wondering if those changes have any effect on the quality of the wetland area that was there. To Ed.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that wetland is there really by accident, certainly not by design, I don't think. It's sitting in what appears to be an area that previously was pond. It was excavated into pond, and then that pond was partially filled in, and I think this this low area remained, and that combined with the underlying compact subsoils, fill subsoils, allows water to be to collect in that depressional area, but then also to be perched above, on top of that compact subsoil, inhibiting downward infiltration. So it's really more just serendipitous, if you will. It's I think by accident that this area is a regulated wetland. Now, the fact that it's a young wetland, I think, has to be considered when you're doing a analysis of its functions and particularly processes. Vegetation still is very young there. It's, you know, at most some of the woody vegetation is developed into saplings, but there are no trees there yet. In some areas, it's mostly just herbaceous and grass vegetation. But you know, that's all going to continue to develop over time. Those saplings will grow to be trees, and some of those open areas will begin to close in with shrubs. So really, you have to I think, couch any analysis of processes and values of that wetland with the understanding that it is very young, and as the soils are still just beginning to develop redoxomorphic features through continued inundation, I would expect those to become more and more hydric in nature. And you know, some of the processes, including you know, amphibian habitat for amphibian breeding and development, you know, it remains to be seen just what will happen with them. So in addition, you know, the landscape on which the wetland is situated, you know, that's all highly disturbed as well, more so now to the north where it's been turned into a waste area. But, you know, the area between that wetland and the pond, it's all developing as well. And yes, although there are a lot of invasives in that area, you know, with development of canopy cover, some of these species like the Japanese knotweed, the mugwort will probably start disappearing in shade, and will, you know, you may start to see some of those invasives dropping out. So it's an area in flux, it's a landscape in transition, and I think you have to take with a big grain of salt, you know, before you conclude, well, you know, this area is highly disturbed, the landscape is highly disturbed, it's a low quality wetland. I think that would be very premature to make that determination.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks, Ned. Jay?
I don't right now have any questions, but I may, depending on how much more discussion there's going to be on this matter. So I'm good for now. Thanks.
Okay, Guy?
No questions.
I don't have any questions for you, Ed, but I do want to go back and I agree with Robert just in terms of restoration and mitigation. I think that's something that I'm looking at very seriously on the site. I'm not sure just mitigation is sufficient given what has been done on the site. So I do want to thank you for providing some sound information for us to take a look at. I think it's helped clarify the picture for some of us, if not all of us. So I do want to thank you for that. But that's still the bigger issue that I'm dealing with in terms of how to deal with the overall site. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So I agree with Robert.
If I may, you know, I do in my letter point out the section of the wetland regulations that talk about mitigation, and they do prioritize the different components of mitigation, and in the following order of priority: restoring first, then enhancing, and then finally creating. So your regulations put restoration at the top of the list of mitigation, wetland mitigation options. So, you know, if the commission feels that, you know, they want to see that entirety of wetland A that was filled restored, your regulations do support that.
And actually, one more thing, Ed, when you were talking about the compact subsoil, so that is something that's just occurred over the years, given the activities at this site, and that sort of created that maybe impermeable soil structure, which has led to the perched water table.
Well, I know the REMA letters point to a haul road, which shows up again and again in the aerial photos, which seems to be right across the area that was filled. So they hypothesized that at least in that area, some of that compact soil was due to the machinery running over that. But if that compact soil extends into the wetland, it would explain the perched water table that you observed well beyond the limits of the filling area. But that compact soil would not be due to machinery going over it. I don't think it's more just the nature of that fill material that was placed there at that time. And it's as I recall from the REMA soil trench logs, I believe that was a silt loam that is just a tight soil. So just by its very texture, it's not going to be, it's going to impede the downward infiltration of water. So I think, if some of it could be due to compaction by machinery, another explanation for that compact nature of that soil is simply the texture, the silt loam texture.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions at this point in time. So where are we now, Shannon?
So let's see if I can find, there we go. Got some, hang on. I'm missing one of the drawings that I wanted. I think I shut them off by accident. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Okay, at this point, I don't know, Bill and George, if you want to discuss the revised plan, and I know we've provided some calculations on areas. So this was discussed, so
You want me to go back?
we can turn it over to you to discuss the mitigation and restoration plan if you'd like at this point.
Sure. Before we do that, George Logan for the record, Bill would like to address the commission.
Yeah, I'd like to go back and we did discuss this at the very initial meeting, and I'd like to reiterate it again. And, first of all, apologize for the activity that took place, because there was certainly no malicious intent in doing this. This property was looked at very extensively before it was purchased back 5-6 years ago. There was very extensive subsoil testing that was done throughout the site, looking for mostly environmental contaminants, because it had been represented that essentially that the site had been massively disturbed and filled over the years. We did have access to some of the historical photographs, including showing where essentially the White Oak Construction Company had moved almost its entire fleet out into the site, and you had a picture of that earlier. So, coming into this from the history of it, we had checked, there had been no permits that had been required or asked of the applicant in the past. Ironically, the same company that did the inland wetlands testing for the temple in, I think it was 2012, was the same company that did the subsurface testing for the owner before he purchased the property. They weren't necessarily looking for inland wetlands, but unfortunately, there's a chance it could have been, but it was never disclosed that there was wetland issues out there. And again, that was 4 years ago, and we do recognize that the site has changed. And when the soil was being spread in the spring, it was also really the end of what had been the intensive excavation of this, when out there about 4 years ago, when you walked across the upland review area, it didn't look a lot different than the work zone where they're working now. Although Mr. Pollock indicates that it's green from the air, it was there were open. You could see open pieces of brick and concrete laying on the ground. So the intent here, it was scheduled to be hydroseeded in the spring after the filling was done, and it was nothing more than an intent to, put an end to the excavation in this portion of the property because it just simply wasn't needed anymore. And it's nothing more than that. It's nothing more than that. I don't know that a reasonable person, having known the history of the property, would ever think that it would be changing over. And Mr. Pollock, you even said that it became a wetland area almost by accident. And in Monday morning quarterbacking, and in retrospect, yeah, we agree with you. We understand that. But the work that was done was spread across two haul roads and stopped there. It didn't go into the other more sensitive area, and there was no need to at that point, because that area is, it's growing with saplings and other growth as you've indicated. So we don't dispute that, but to say that there was, when you're looking for a reasonable and prudent alternative, that wasn't the standard at the time, because it wasn't an application. It was just an intent to essentially cap off the property with soil piles that were there, with excess soil that was there and had been represented from the previous owner that had been scraped from the soil and stored there. That's all it is. So there's no other answer, nothing more deeper to look for. Stanley, do you want to add anything?
No, Bill, I think you said it pretty much. The area was excavated since 1950. The river was widened. It's 60 feet deep. And prior to purchasing the property, we were told and obviously observed that the pond was dug out and it was filled in. The area that we did fill was, like Bill said, the intent to level out the piece of property and clean it up and just, cap the piece of property. Like Bill said, there was concrete and bricks, and we just leveled it out. And with the intent that we originally, at one time, or even at this point, there was supposed to be a road going, connecting, and the intent was to at least level that out. So we can get access and get some surveying done and sit down with the town and see what the future plans would be. There was no intent to defraud anybody. It was just, the site was excavated and filled numerous times prior to what we did.
And there was certainly no intent to hide this either. This didn't take place over a weekend. This was a 3 to almost a 4-month project that was going on. So it's not like it was something somebody tried to sneak in there. It just evidently it got reported at some point in time, and it stopped, and we've cooperated with everything along the way. We did offer to, hydroseed it, and the staff said, no, don't hydroseed it. So, we left it as it was. The silt fences have been put up. We put up some other, safety barriers as well, in case, anybody trespasses onto the property where the steep cliffs are over by the temple. So, again, in retrospect, it's a lot different from what a reasonable person and what was actually seen, back in 2016, 2017.
Okay, thank you, Bill. George, do you want to move on to talking about the mitigation and restoration plan that's up on the screen? Is that where you'd like to start with this? Okay, George, we've lost your audio for the conference room. No, you've got no audio.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it
Yep,
on
you're
now? It must have been a loose connection. You can hear us now?
Yes, yep, loud and clear. You're all set.
Electronics, you gotta love it.
Yes.
Any rate, so I hope you heard what Bill was saying at the end.
We did, yeah, no, we heard all of Bill and then it was quiet. So I had asked if you were ready to present. So yes, thank you, Bill and Stanley, for your comments. I think that's helpful, and thank you for the clarification. And then George, if you're
sure
ready to chat about the plan that's on the screen, and if you'd like me to open up other items that we've shared, that's fine too.
This is good enough for now. So how did we arrive here? I think this was sort of an iterative analysis and iterative process, I think, that happens often when you have professionals that put their heads together, and there might be some initial disagreements about things or preferences that one consultant has over another. As you recall, the initial thought was that we would do mitigation by creation only next to the pond. And the reason for that was dual. I wanted to ensure that I would have a stable hydrology that's long-term, so we knew where the water in the pond is. And secondly, we figured it was an opportunity to take care of some invasives that are there, particularly black locust, which you basically have an oasis there of black locust and mugwort in the understory. And, whenever you're creating a wetland, you always have to look at its juxtaposition with other wetlands. And it made sense for us to sort of do a mitigation enhancement in the sense that it was going to go next to a pond and enhance the pond environment. And so there will be this synergism, if you will, as far as functions and values. But then we started hearing Mr. Pollack and some of the concerns he had about the amount of excavation that we would have to do, some of the slopes that we'd have to deal with. And of course, also importantly, we were hearing that the commission, of course, and Mr. Pollack was suggesting that any mitigation would have to have a restoration component. So we heard that loud and clear, and this is what we have presented. Now, my initial objections to this were as follows. But I've kind of recovered a little bit on this, and I'll explain how that happened. My initial objections was that I was not sure that by doing what we're recommending now that we would have as stable a water source, if you will, compared to being next to the pond where we know where the water table is. Secondly, I was not convinced that restoring a haul road, which was the majority of the area, the disturbed area of wetland that was taken, would make sense from a functions and value analysis. But then, we started talking, and, we talked about the evolution of this wetland and where it would possibly be going in the future. things that would happen. And of course, thankfully, the amount of invasives associated with wetland A at this point are limited. We have one Phragmites patch on the backside that we can take care of and keep an eye on. We have a little bit of knotweed in that little purple circle that you see. And actually, there's some multiflora rose there too. We could take care of that at the same time. And the other thing we knew, and which Mr. Pollack had pointed out to, was that regardless of what was happening in the Hall Road, that the rest of the wetland A is basically a perch wetland where there's a almost impervious layer of this compacted reddish silted clay loam almost that's invariably about 30 inches below the surface, sometimes a little closer. So we know that that's there and that's going to support the hydrology of this wetland, and has over the sort of 12 to 15 years of the existence of this wetland. So what we decided to do is to do a bunch of things. One, as you see in the area that's highlighted with yellow, little box, I can't point to it, but you can see, and that's basically the area where the whole road more or less pre-existed, that we could put that back into a more productive wetland than what was there before. And by doing what Mr. Pollack suggested, which might necessitate us to go a little deeper and do a few soil amendments that are not presently there. And so the restoration of that area would be about 4,500 square feet. Then as far as mitigation by way of creation, we would expand the wetland A, both on the east side and the west side, and that is to the tune of about 10,300 square feet. And that's, again, that's flexible. We could go a little more if need be. I don't think we should. I think we've kind of calculated what's being missed by by the way, the 5 pockets. You remember there was 9 pockets altogether that BNL looked at, and 4 of them are under the fill piles. 4 of them I looked at, and I decided that they did not qualify, at least in my professional opinion, as wetlands. But of course, we don't know if the other ones did or not. And then there was one that I couldn't make up my mind because there might have been a little disturbance there as machinery went back and forth. And so I decided to take that into consideration. So we have 5. And the total of the 5 put together is almost 4,000 square feet, 3,890. And so our total disturbance, if you will, is 10,065 square feet. So more or less, plus or minus 10,000 square feet is what we're calculating. Which is less than a quarter of an acre. The other thing, so these 2 areas that I highlighted with blue, you'll see I did not go flush up against the wetland in some areas, because by doing that, we can create a few little upland islands, if you will, in the middle of this wetland, which is always a good habitat enhancement. Now, how would we do this? We probably would end up doing a couple of core samples here and there in these areas, determining where the impervious surface is below the surface, which we are assuming is going to be within 30 inches. We might have to create more depressional areas, and the reason for that is because, again, I'm a little concerned about having proper hydrology. So I would want to have sort of an area that's a little lower, so that the storage capacity, the hydraulic storage capacity of this area, even in the summertime, would allow for saturation at least to the surface, or some shallow inundation during storms, which we have seen, obviously, with the storms we had about 7 weeks ago. So shallow excavation, and then amendment with some topsoil material, maybe some compost. And those areas will be slightly more depressional than the surrounding wetlands, but not too, maybe order of 4 or 5 inches, which is kind of average what you find throughout this wetland anyhow. There's ups and downs. So there is some microtopography. And then, of course, we would seed them and plant them appropriately. And what the plantings and seeding that we would do would not necessarily be what's there already, but be something that would actually enhance those areas, and then, of course, enhance the overall wetland. So we would choose species that are presently not there, that would love this kind of environment. And so we would increase the biodiversity of the wetland itself, and then by virtue of that, its long-term function and value. The other thing that we did is we recognized that we always need to have some kind of a buffer. If the only thing it's doing to sort of delineate the end of where the wetland is, the regular resource, and give it a little breathing room. So we envisioned there a 15-foot buffer is what that purple, sorry, not purple, that's the orange line shows. And if you recall, or at least I recall, because I looked at the trenches, that at the outer edge of that particular line, the fill is no more than 3 feet, maybe 3.5 in a few areas. So we would envision there is that there would be a slope that will be no steeper than 3 to 1 that will go up to the line, if you will, the orange line. So you'd have this little slope coming down to the wetland. And mind you that the area we're restoring might end up being a little more depressional than it was originally, only because of the situation that I explained, where you actually had a lower layer that was impervious, and then you had a thinner layer further up that was also perching, which also made for wetland kind of conditions. So, but we can't recreate the small layer. We have to go with the lower layer. So that's what we would have to tap into. And the other thing that I said in one of my emails to Shannon today is that I was envisioning, oh yeah, I can read it here to you. I had a note and it said that the maximum slope of the buffer would be 3 to 1, and it's probably going to be a lot shallower than that. And it would be 3 to 1 if it was 5 feet of fill. And that I was proposing 37 eastern cedars to be planted 12 feet on center at the outer limit of the wetland buffer, and that would not only be a nice buffer, that would be a perfect plant for that kind of soil, which is kind of depauperate right at the edge. And that would also outline the area that we would then stay away from with any future development that would happen sometime down the line. A little segue here, which is kind of an outer kind of mitigation of sorts or restoration. And I also submitted a report today to Shannon. And again, it's not necessarily directly related with the wetlands themselves, but during our many meetings and conversations with all of you folks and with staff, there had been concerns about the invasives that were out there on the 4.6 acres of open grassy sandland, if you will. So we did some soil sampling at the Yukon Soil Laboratory. Those have been submitted as part of an attachment. Had some photos, and my colleague Sigrun Godwa went out there, kind of figured out what the trends are, what are the annuals, what are the perennials, what's going on in general, and we made some recommendations. And what we found from the soil analysis for that is the soils are pretty depauperate as far as nutrients, macronutrients, and micronutrients for plant growth. You almost have a sand barren out there of sorts. So we made some recommendations. One of the first recommendations we made, and I'll get back to the wetland mitigation in a moment, is to deadhead all the mugwort that's out there, because that, to us, that's probably the worst species. We thought the knotweed would, but apparently the knotweed didn't do very well. I guess we can thank the drought a little bit for that. But again, it's the fertility that's so low that didn't allow the knotweed to do well, which is good. So we made some recommendations for seeding some of those bare areas come in the spring, and some annual mowing and whatnot. Anyhow, so back to the wetland mitigation. So this is the plan that we've come up with, and we're anxious to hear what Mr. Pollack might have to say and what recommendations he might have to make. And of course, if this is something we would move forward with, we would have to come up with a much more specific plan of what we do, how we would do it, and whatnot. So it would be obviously a full restoration mitigation plan that you folks probably are used to seeing from the likes of me. I think this is all that I wanted to say. I did, as I said, included a couple of photographs that we might want to quickly, Shannon, show in passing.
Are those the aerials, George, that you want to show?
Those are the two areas, and I think it'll be instructive for the commission, especially because they have probably not seen the most recent aerial photograph that Google put out. There it is. So let's see if I can explain this. So this is one that Google took back. Well, Google didn't take it. Someone else did it for Google, just to be sure. So another company. And this is from February. I believe it was February 20 something or rather. I didn't put the exact date. And you can see that the area that we're talking about, that the grading was in process. And it's kind of interesting how it was done in layers. One thing that I did, and I went back to Google, looked at the 2016 aerial photograph, and I sketched in that red line that you see in there, and that's the Hall Road. Now, again, it's plus or minus a few feet because these are not necessarily orthophotos. Some are better than others. So I superimposed, obviously, the 2016 Hall Road from the aerial photograph on this 2020. And you can see clearly the wet portion of wetland A. That's where the arrow is pointing. You can also see in that little green highlighted area, the southern portion of wetland B, which was pre-existing any of the activity that happened. But also wanted to point out that the northern portion of wetland B, the one that we've all looked at with the 2 feet plus of border and with the amphibian activity of eastern toads and green frogs that we've all discussed, that did not exist at that time. And my understanding from talking to the owner, talking to some of his own people, was that was created during the operation, as is typically done often. They create little areas where the water can go to and pond so they can get it off whatever they're doing and sort of be able to store it. And it's just a typical practice that's done during earth working. And very often it's required on plans when permits are obtained. So again, I wanted to show you that that did not exist there in February 2020. If you want to switch to the next one, Shannon.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to find it, George.
Hey, don't worry about it. All it is, and the commissioners can look at it. What I did is I left the 2016 delineation of the Hall Road and put it on a 1991 or 2 aerial to show that more or less that whole road was there back in the 1990s. And some of the other pictures that I've given you in my report also shows that that was a frequently trafficked, or if you will, arterial highway through the site. Anyway, so that's what we have, and I think, but more importantly, is for us to discuss the mitigation and to hear maybe some comments that Mr. Pollack would have, and we're obviously anxious to move the ball forward and get to the finish line as quickly as we can.
Okay, Bob, which direction would you like to go at this point, Mr.
What's
Hill?
going on?
Just pretty letters and look at stamps and addresses.
I didn't catch what you said because I'm hearing some background noise from people.
Yeah, I think I took care of that. I was just curious as to which direction you would, if you'd like to hear from Ed, or if you'd like at first and then go back to commissioners for their thoughts, or if you'd like to do it in a different order.
No, I mean, I think I'd at least like to hear some comments from Ed in terms of sort of what's being proposed, because I guess this is a little bit different than what you had originally looked at least that's my understanding, because there were modifications made. So
Correct.
not trying to put you necessarily on the spot without having a chance to really take a look at it. But just sort of maybe in general, if you can discuss your professional feelings about this, and then we can go back with some of the commission members.
Sure. Again, for the record, Ed Pollack. I've reviewed this conceptual mitigation, revised mitigation plan on my computer screen. Shannon shared it, sent it to me, and from that, I would, as well as Mr. Logan's presentation just now, I would offer the following comments. First of all, I think it is appropriate for the owner to have George prepare just a conceptual plan at this point. There's no point in spending a lot of time and money developing a plan which the commission may not want to see. So a conceptual plan lacking a lot of the details that would ultimately be present in a final plan. That's fine at this point, at least as for a discussion point.
If I can interrupt you for a second, so are you looking more like a set of plans at 30% complete rather than the 70 or the 90% complete, that type of thing?
Well, no, I mean, this is for this stage in which the owner has revised the mitigation, their concept of a mitigation plan, and is presenting it, that conceptual plan to the commission. I think it's fine to just sketch lines on a map and provide a narrative. This is what we would like to, this is what we are proposing instead of what we initially proposed for mitigation. What do you think, commissioners? If you give us the blessing to further develop this, then we'll develop a full mitigation plan with all of the details that you would come to expect. So, ultimately, the mitigation plan has to be a full plan with, showing existing and proposed grading, showing plant materials, showing, erosion control, all of those details. So, but at this point, this is fine for discussion purposes, which I think is what we're doing at this point in time. But I would note that the conceptual plan, I believe it's an improvement over the initial wetland mitigation plan, because as you know, I did express my concerns over the main element of that initial mitigation plan, which was an excavation adjacent to the pond. And I noted that that plan faced some pretty significant constraints, trying to put what would amount to a pretty deep excavation in between the pond and steep slopes. There's just not a lot of room to work in there. So I don't think really that, I never looked very favorably on that wetland creation next to the pond. So I'm glad to see that it was moved away from the pond. Now, having said that, I note that this revised plan does not involve a full restoration of wetland A. And as I noted earlier, your regulations prioritize restoration over creation or enhancement. So I think the commission would certainly be on firm ground to request a full restoration of wetland A if they so choose. As I've noted, you would ultimately need to be presented with a detailed plan to contain those elements that I described just before. I would recommend that the owner have the soils tested in the two proposed wetland creation areas on the eastern and western sides of wetland A, to determine whether those soils are underlain by the same compact silt or silty clay loam soils that Mr. Logan found in the exploratory trenches and likely are responsible for the ponding at the north end of wetland A. So you want to know whether the hydrology, a perched hydrology, can be expected to be created in those two lobes at the eastern and western ends of wetland A that are proposed for creation. It's my professional opinion that the 15-foot restoration of a 15-foot vegetated upland review area or vegetated buffer adjacent to the north edge of wetland A, it's insufficient. That's very, very minimal vegetated buffer. The width of a vegetated buffer is generally dependent, or the recommendation is dependent upon the values and functions and processes of a wetland, as well as the nature of the development that's proposed adjacent to the wetland, the magnitude of the disturbance. And right now, there is no plan in front of you, so you don't know, you can't anticipate just what ultimately may be proposed as a development adjacent to this wetland. And depending upon its nature, if it's intensive, involves a lot of impervious, and intense development, then a wider buffer is generally recommended. That's the state of the science. And if it's simply a 15-foot vegetated buffer is restored adjacent to that wetland, well, I could see an argument down the road where the owner might say, well, that's what you were given, the 15 feet at that time, and that's what will be preserved perpetuity. But I wouldn't want to have the commission locked into a very minimal vegetated buffer adjacent to this functioning wetland. And I would recommend restoring that vegetated buffer of 50 feet adjacent to that wetland. Ultimately, the width of that buffer, if development is ultimately proposed adjacent to it, that will then have to be considered with respect to what type of development is proposed. But I wouldn't want to lock you into a very, very minimal vegetated buffer, which is it's inappropriate for the functioning of that wetland. Finally, I would request that the owner provide the commission with a matrix, a ledger, if you will, of the existing wetland area, wetland A, amount of area, wetland A that's been filled, the amount of those total area of the wetland pockets that were filled, and then the amount of upland review area that was filled earlier this year associated with those wetlands. And on the other side of the ledger, the area of wetland that would be restored, the area of new wetland that would be created, and finally the area of upland review area that would be restored. So you can see on that ledger disturbance versus restoration and creation. And those are my comments. Thanks very much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Just real quick, because Ed had asked about that restoration areas briefly. This came in from George. There's a couple of things that came in from George today, and unfortunately my schedule today didn't allow for distributing this. I got it to Ed at about 5 o'clock. I had just enough time to upload these things in for the meeting this evening, but and I realize you folks are just seeing this now, but there is a calculation of the wetland disturbance and then the upland disturbance, and then the wetland restoration areas and the upland restoration area. But certainly putting that together in, you know, a chart on a plan would probably be helpful to include that documentation on the mitigation plan. And perhaps update it based on the conversation and any modifications that are made based on the discussion this evening.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around all the information that we've been dealing with tonight, so.
I understand.
Oh, they were, yeah, that's, the picture was from Green Energy Plan National Park. Yeah. I'll send you the picture as soon as I can.
Okay.
One question that I do have, Shannon, looking at the map that you have up,
Yes, sir.
is right where the hand is.
Yeah.
Well, now it's the X, but that area in there with the grading and some of the orange colors, because I'm seeing, you know, orange being proposed as part of the potential mitigation, but I'm at a loss as to what that area is down below.
Georgie, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what they did is superimpose the contours from the survey. I think some of that is the contours from survey and grading, and I don't know what the origin is, but I believe it's just contour information and is not reflective of anything proposed. But
That's
George,
correct.
comment on that, what this information and these orange, I think they're elevations, I'm assuming.
That is correct. So if you took the other plan that doesn't have the aerial photograph, and we got rid of the aerial photograph, it would probably be a lot clearer, and we certainly could do that for the commission, so that it would be a lot more clear as to what the elevations are without having the interference of the aerial.
Okay.
Thank you. I guess to mix things up a little bit, I'm going to actually start maybe with Guy to see if you've got any questions, comments, where you think we're going with this. Time we need to take a look at it, whatever.
Okay. Guy, you got to unmute yourself real quick. There you go.
It seems to me that it would be premature to go anywhere without all the documentation and photographs that everybody's talking about that we don't have. That's my view.
But, well, just to be clear, you have, other than this, and this plan was sent to you folks, so aside from the soil analysis that came in from George today, which was the soil testing of the soil here, you have everything. You have REMA's reports and you have Ed's reports and you've got this plan.
Well, then I'm saying I'm overwhelmed.
Okay.
I don't think you're alone, Guy. Was that it, Guy?
Yeah, that's it.
Jay?
Jay, you might have to unmute yourself. Yeah, Jay, you're gonna have to unmute your phone. There you go.
Okay, sorry about that. I must have messed something up. Okay, so I don't know if I'm overthinking this. I'm told I'm guilty of overthinking a lot. So, and I don't know if I should know this or not, because it is very overwhelming, especially for someone like myself who's really trying to learn more about this stuff. But one of the notes I made here, so they're presenting, or they're beginning the process of presenting a mitigation and restoration plan. So do we need, and that's part of the process of removing the cease and desist. So do we need to take a vote at some point in time and take an action to accept that before we can even consider the cease and desist? That's my question. And I don't know who that goes to, Shannon, Bob, whoever. And did I make any sense in how I just said that?
Yes, you did.
You want me to take this?
Yep.
Sure. I made a note of this, and this is exactly why I said I may have a question later, depending on the discussion, because I kind of had this in the back of my mind. And again, I don't know if I'm overthinking this or not. Go ahead, Shannon. I'm done.
No, that's fine. I'm not exactly so Bob understood your question, but he wants me to answer. I didn't really understand the question, but what I'm going to say is this is still under the umbrella of the cease and desist. Okay, so we've allowed the owner to do certain specific things, install the erosion control, remove the mugwort because it's invasive, and it made sense to do that now before the seeds drop. So there were specific things that we've allowed the owner to do while still having the wetland cease and desist order in place. We're trying to get, we've heard from the owner's consultant, we've had our consultant, we now have a mitigation and restoration plan. We probably need to advance and get to some middle ground on this a little more. And I've got a couple of thoughts, because it sounds like perhaps folks are having difficulty synthesizing all the information. So we can come to that again here in a bit. But we've got to kind of get a little closer to a commonality of what the commission's looking for. And then ultimately the owner will have to submit an application, because this is large enough and extensive enough. We will need an application from the owner to implement this restoration and mitigation work, so we actually have a permit on file. So yes, as we go along, we're incrementally allowing activities under the umbrella of the cease and desist. And then the commission, given circumstances, can relax certain aspects to allow certain activities that are beneficial, so that we're for the betterment of the project as opposed to the detriment. Ultimately, yes, when we're finished, the cease and desist ultimately is released, but we're a little ways from that.
Yeah, and I think that was what I was leading up to, was the possibility of an application procedurally or timing wise doesn't even get considered until the cease and desist is released, or am I wrong?
The cease and desist it'll stay in place. What we need to get to is a basic conceptual agreement on the plan that's in front of us. So we need to conceptually come to a consensus or close to a consensus and say, okay, owner, we're ready to have you and your consultants develop this into a full plan, and do that under the umbrella of an application. The cease and desist will stay in place. The application will come in. At the time the application's approved, the cease and desist will lift to the extent that it allows them to implement the work in order to conduct the activities that we need to get the restoration and mitigation in place. And then once that's all done, then the cease and desist will completely release. It's done incrementally.
Okay, unfortunately, I'm at a disadvantage because of my personal situation. I haven't been able to be at any site walks. You guys most of you understand that. So I guess it is very overwhelming, and for me, it's kind of confusing exactly how this is going to work, because this project is so overwhelming. So thank you for taking a stab at that. That would make sense to me now. I guess I just wanted to make sure I understood exactly how this is going to work as we go forward.
Certainly.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks, Jay, and thanks, Shannon.
You're welcome.
Ned?
I just want to confirm that on the sheet we're looking at, are the red triangles the test pits that were done? That
Now, so
are the red rectangles or orange rectangles?
those were the trenches. So these
Yeah,
are
okay.
that were done. So those are superimposed.
To Ed's point, about the 15-foot buffer that's shown, I also think that's not enough, but it again goes to the question of what are we doing here, what kind of work is being proposed here. I think to know what kind of buffer we need to know what's going in on the other side of what's proposed. Is it commercial? Is it residential? Is it how much, what kind of runoffs can we expect from it?
I'm going to interrupt because
Sure.
Attorney Gelsky just stated, for the record, their intent was to cap the site. So you can set in a buffer that you feel is appropriate based on the wetland and based on the information that has been presented. If and when they choose, whether it's the current owner, a future owner, a developer yet to be named, to do any further activity on this property, they will have to come in for a permit. Anything within, we've 150-foot upland review takes you basically all the way across to the toe of that fill slope. So they can't do anything in here without being in the 150-foot upland review. And any new activity would have to come in for review and permit with the Inland Wetland Commission. And at that time, then the evaluation can take place based on the merits of that application and appropriate additional buffers, mitigation, conservation easements, stormwater control that's specific to that application can take place at that particular point in time. I think that's going to be the best way for us to get past this. Otherwise, we are going to be on a hamster wheel that we cannot get off. So at the end of the day, this, and I can, because I think the survey, oh, my stupid computer. I'm pretty sure the survey, yeah. So here's wetland A.
Yep.
Here's the 150-foot upland review. Okay, line off of it.
Yep.
And you can see the contour lines, right? This is the embankment, and then that's
I can see this. Yeah, right.
and then the embankment off. So they can't do this whole area. Basically, everything you're seeing in the aerial view that's on the other map, I can scroll back to in a second.
Yeah.
That whole area is within the 150-foot upland review area.
Okay.
So anything that's done in the future, again, regardless of who does it or what it is, would require a permit with this agency.
Okay, and so when they're when they say restored wetland or buffer to restored wetland, so are we looking at a conservation easement or?
Well, that's something that you folks can discuss as this evolves. So one, for right now, for what you know now, is 15 feet enough, or do you want, Ed's discussed 50 feet, which is probably, more in the realm of what we would typically do, even if it was a development coming in, and a brand new development, we would want anywhere from a 25-foot buffer that's undisturbed. And then you can also decide, does it warrant putting a conservation easement over it now? Or is it something that you'd want a conservation easement over if they came back for a future development project? Again, that could be 5 years from now. It could be 20 years from now.
Okay.
So that's part of this conversation that can continue to take place as we're looking at this in totality.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks. And then Mark,
No questions at this time.
Robert,
Yeah, certainly we've got a lot of information to go through. In terms of moving forward, I liked the recommendation from Ed to maybe take the plan that's up on the screen now and move that to the next step with a more fleshed out concept plan to help us move along. I think some of the comments that were already made, and I would agree that, you know, we need to have a more substantial buffer to the wetlands. So a 15-foot, I don't think accomplishes that. We heard Ed say, you know, a 50-foot minimum. I think George certainly has the ability to come up with, well, and George, you can certainly jump in if you had concern about the recommendation from Ed, or you have a different recommendation, then certainly we'd give you that opportunity. But I think moving forward to get a conceptual plan would help. I don't want to spend a lot of time going back and forth on this issue because I don't know we're necessarily going to reach agreement. But for additional information that I'd like to see, Attorney Gowski, you said that prior to the purchase of the property, there was a fairly extensive due diligence done. There was some environmental work done. Did the scope of that specifically include a wetland assessment? Because obviously a qualified environmental consultant could be at the site, but they're not going to go beyond the scope of the work they had. So if you could provide the scope of the work for the environmental assessment, and if there was a report generated that was used prior to the purchase of the property, I think that would be very helpful, because with all due respect to property owner and the attorney, with all due respect, it just doesn't make any sense that you would do an environmental assessment of the property, then engage in, as you said, it wasn't a small task, a multi-month process to regrade and cap, to then have conversation with the town about future development. It just, you know, again, we keep coming back, at least I keep coming back to, this was clearly, in my mind, done for development purposes. Whether get that on the record or not is sort of irrelevant, because absent information, I just think the facts would certainly lay that out. You did due diligence to assess the site. You purchased the site knowing what you had. You then knowingly chose to engage in a major activity, and for the reasons I expressed already, close proximity to the river, a clear wetland that would have been regulated. It just doesn't make sense to spend that amount of time, energy, and certainly money to regrade, to hydroseed, to then have a conversation with the town. So if there was a pre-purchase assessment, knowing the scope of that work, and if there was within that scope, if it's, you know, was seeking wetland delineation, then that would be enlightening. If the scope of the work didn't include wetland assessment, then the work the consultant did, I think, has minimal value to our commission. So again,
I can answer that. It's because the site had been so disturbed, and we were aware of that. We had the historical pictures, the historical aerials of how the pond had been made bigger and then filled back in. So, and it had been represented that it was, you know, had been changed over the decades, and that it had been filled with off-site fill, obviously. So we were concerned about what was the fill that came in. That was the main concern. What was the potential environmental hazard in the fill? And because it was so significant, in all honesty, there was never a belief that it could even possibly be wetland soils that came in. Because when it was done, it was brick, it was mortar, it was, you know, concrete, you know, that type of thing. Not much asphalt at all. So, you know, it was done from an environmental aspect only because of the intense, you know, historical disturbance. And, you know, I can't answer the motivation with the recent filling, but given the historical filling of the site without permits, we knew there had never been permits. We had inquired into that. It wasn't a big step to do what was done because that's what had been done for decades and decades. You know, it's not, when you look at the size of the site and the amount of material that came in, it's minuscule in comparison to what has come in over the site over all the years. And that's all it is. It's, you know, I don't know how much I can tell you. So the environmental impact, the environmental review, you're right. It doesn't add really anything to the wetlands. It wasn't done for wetlands purposes. Again, it was done by the same company who had done the wetlands on the other site, but it doesn't mean it was the same type of professional that went out there at all. It would have been maybe lucky if it had been discovered but again, that wasn't the intent of it, Mr. Eisner.
Sure, yes. So if the contract for environmental services was to determine the quality of the fill, that's all the consultant was going to do. And again, I think it goes to being, we're probably not going to reach agreement on this point, but I find it hard to believe that there was enough awareness to know not to buy a site that had contaminated soil, but yet say, well, you know, we're not going to worry about the Wetlands Act, which has been on the books for 40 years. It just, you know, there was enough of environmental awareness to check for one parameter. I think the reasonable due diligence would have been to do a more comprehensive environmental assessment. But again, it's.
Yeah, and in retrospect, you're absolutely right. But again, you know, Mr. Pollock and Mr. And George have indicated, you know, that the site has been evolving and it's still young. And when this was looked at back in 2015, 2016, before it was purchased in 2017, you know, it was different back then too. So, you know, here we are, and we're gonna address it. But there's not a big magical answer out there that I don't think you're gonna be happy with as to why it was done. Why was it done? It was done because it was always done. And that's not a great answer. I know, I see a grimace, but.
Well, I think, you know, it goes back to, I think we're probably not going to reach resolution. I've said it several times. My perspective, I think the facts and the evidence would show the work was done for development purposes. So absence, you know, and I think, you know, Stanley, you touched on it. You said you were capping the area, you were making it look better, you're going to hydroseed it, and then you were going to talk to the town about the future of the site. Clearly, and you know, we probably all recognize it's a little easier now to look back and say, well, could that sequence of events have been different? So again, my perspective is it would appear the work was done, the extensive work was done to facilitate future development. At this point, I think we're all trying to move forward. My recommendation is to, you know, heed the recommendation from the town's consultant to try and get a concept plan, and I would welcome feedback from, you know, George Logan on, you know, his feedback as to whether the approach recommended by Ed would be a good next step or not. So that's the end of my comment. Thank you.
I could answer that now if you like. So certainly, I'd be more than happy to even, you know, discuss it with Ed further if need be, and get to the next step. Again, it wouldn't be a full plan, but I think he indicated a few things that I could look into. You know, are the soils appropriate in the two areas of wetland creation? Maybe I need a little more information for the restoration area. And then to give him my opinion or agree or disagree with him as to whether now is the time for a larger buffer, or maybe a larger buffer would be something that would happen when development would be on the table. So certainly I can move this plan along, and I can even get it to a point where, let's call it a 30% plan. We have enough information to see, okay, this can work, and they've thought about the buffer, they've thought about the soils, and we can move on.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Dave?
I guess I agreed with Ed's initial review of the proposed mitigation here. 15 feet is not enough. I would look more towards complete restoration as well. And with the 15-foot line, you have actually filled wetlands beyond the buffer area, which to me is totally unacceptable. I guess that's my initial thoughts for now.
Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, hi. I want to just sort of echo Jay and Ned and Robert. This is a big, sprawling, heavily researched series of pieces of information, but I don't know that I understand sort of the fundamental reasoning behind a lot of choices that were made, to the extent where I don't know that I can even make a strong case for a decision right now. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Rich?
I would tend to agree with Ed's review of this map we're looking at. I don't, we obviously need more information as to whether those wetland creation areas are feasible. My feeling is that the red area should be restored in its entirety, and I would agree with Ed that the 15-foot buffer is not appropriate. The other concern is that there should be some consideration of memorializing this, so that 5 years from now we're not back in the same situation with the property owner at that time and going through this all again. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. George, I'm hoping you can help me on this, because this is looking at the buffer area, and I'm just trying to get a better handle on how this area is proposed, in the sense that whether it's 15 feet, 25, 50 feet, whatever it ends up being. So would the game plan be to try and level out that area, however wide that buffer is, and then from that point you start the regrading where you're at a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 slope, so that in essence you're still removing some of the additional fill that was placed on site? But I don't have an idea in my head as to how you're proposing to actually construct this sloped area that you were referencing, whether it's, 5 feet high, 3 feet high, 3-to-1, 4-to-1 slope. How do you propose to deal with the buffer? Is that going to be a regraded area, and then beyond that setback area, for the buffer area, that's when you start doing the grading? So I'm just trying to get a handle as to how you're proposing to even do this.
So, good question. So no matter what we end up with, as far as whether it's 15 feet or something else, the idea would be that in the yellow area, that would be somewhat super excavated based on the situation that I explained. I have to go a little deeper than it was before in that Hall Road area by a few inches. And then at the northern edge of the restoration area as seen on the plan today, we would start removing the excess fill and either chasing back to the original grade, or by the time we get to the outer point of the buffer, if that's 15 feet or something else, that would be the top of it. So we would start at the wetland at, say, 0, and then we'd end up chasing it and grading it out to whatever the fill is at this point, outside of the buffer that we end up with. So that's the slope, and it's not going to be a uniform, obviously, slope, but somewhat, because you know, it's pretty flat out there, but there's some gradations. So, but that's what I'm envisioning, and that's why I said that at the top of that, when we actually finally reach the existing grade, we would put a ring of cedars, 3-4 footers at first, to sort of demarcate, at least for now, while we are having a restoration, of where the edge of the buffer is for said wetland restoration. And then at some point down the line, if an application came before the commission and it was determined that you needed a more buffer for this particular wetland and the functions and the values that it provides, and then that will be considered at that time. I'm just trying to, my purpose for the buffer is to isolate the restored area from the rest of the site and provide a little bit of a separation and a demarcation for this time, because the rest of it, and you'll see the report that I've given Shannon that she couldn't produce, that what we're proposing right now is several things that would continue to maintain that area out there as a productive meadow until such time as some development plan arises. And who knows, there might not be a development plan for 10, 20 years. Hard to tell.
Yeah, I mean, it helps a little bit, but let me ask my question a little differently. So with this slope that's being proposed to kind of regrade the area for the buffer, are you proposing that slope would start on the northerly most yellow line, or would it start at the northerly line of the proposed buffer area?
It would start at the yellow line and then go up from there.
Okay, because I'm not sure that I would buy that.
As far as the concept, or as far as
No, as far as where it starts. I mean, the concept itself may be fine, but I'm not sure that I would go along with the toe of slope running around that northern portion of the yellow line. I guess I'd have to see more about it, but I just have a serious question about having the buffer area, you know, totally sloped, whether it's a 3-to-1, 4-to-1, you know, whatever we end up deciding.
Well, there are many natural buffers that are that, but let me say this to you. We do have topography for that area. So we have the ability to do a couple of transects and give you a more realistic way of looking at this, instead of, you know, my kind of cockamamie way of giving you a concept at this point. So we can certainly grade it out and make it proper, so that based on the topography we have up there. And if you're concerned that, you know, if you wanted to see something where we went a few additional feet, where we weren't climbing steeply, say at a 3-to-1, directly from the area of restoration, I understand what I think you're saying. Go a few more feet and then gradually start going up. If we did that, then we probably ended up giving you a little bit more of a buffer, which is, I think, something that I'm hearing the commission asking at any rate.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get it clear in my head how the buffer area fits in with the grading. So that's something, I mean, I've stated what my concern is, so I think you've worked with me on enough things where you kind of know what I'm looking for and how to deal with it. But I think, and then the other comments that the commission members made, and I kind of go along with that as well. But my primary issue, not really being able to get that visual, is how the buffer area is being treated in conjunction with the sloping. So that's something that I need to have some clarity on. So hopefully you understand what I'm questioning on that. So
Yeah, I do.
okay, I mean, I don't think I have anything else. I mean, commission members have raised a lot of good questions and comments. And I also kind of go along with what Ed's saying too. So with that, Shannon, where do we want to go from here?
So I've got I guess a quick question on a couple of things. So George, I'm going to start with you. The soil analysis that came in today also has recommendations for plant. Is that what you're saying? It has information regarding the restoration and mitigation area? Is that?
No, it just deals with specifically the rest of the area that's been graded.
Okay.
And basically what it says, that in order to make sure that the invasives don't take hold, and also to make sure that the area is stabilized, that come spring, first of all, we would come up with a specialized seed mix that fits that particular environment, which would not only diversify it as a meadow for as many years it's going to be a meadow, but also, stabilize it. And then we have some recommendations of an annual mowing.
Okay. But that's the report that you're referring to that I don't think I have up here, but that's what you were referring to when you spoke earlier.
Correct.
Okay. I want to make sure I'm not missing another document. That's all, because there was a couple of emails that came in today, and unfortunately my ability to react on the day of the meeting just kind of depends on how the day is going. So
I understand. Believe me, I understand completely.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something. Okay. So that takes care of that. So there is one report left then that came in today that has to be distributed to the commission. There are a few members that have expressed confusion, uncertainty about information that has been provided, it sounds like, leading up to this. So and I don't know, it's certainly difficult to do via Zoom. So there's a couple of things that can be done. We have the reports from George that have his full delineation, his full function and value analysis. I think there's 2 or 3 reports. They had all been uploaded to the SharePoint site. We started using the SharePoint site to try to cut down on the volume of emails and attachments with respect to this particular application. I can request that we have hard copies provided, and we can have hard copies of those documents distributed to the commission if you think that's needed to help provide clarity with respect to this. It sounds like this particular mitigation plan is going to evolve, so I don't know that there's a whole lot of benefit. And I could certainly print out colored 11 by 17s of this, but I don't know that there's a whole lot of benefit to just widely distributing this one page if our marching orders for George are to expand upon this and really take this to the next step and address some of the concerns that Ed raised. The only other report and document we have is the one report from Ed. It's 8 pages. So I guess I want to make sure that as a commission, you all have the information you need to make informed decisions, and that you're either comfortable looking at the SharePoint site, or if you want hard copies of this information, I'm happy to arrange making sure you get that information. But at no point should we be in a position where you're left uncertain as to what's being asked for of you, or uncertain as to, you know, the direction this is going and what's before you. So if you want to think about that and you can send me an email, that's fine. If it's something anyone wants to discuss right now, I'm fine with that as well. But it's imperative that you folks have the information that you feel you need. And if you feel something's lacking, then I need to understand what you feel is lacking and how you want that delivered to you. Okay. So I will leave that open-ended. That's open at any time. You can call me, you can email me, or again, you can discuss it now or later in the meeting, and that's fine. And then I guess we'll leave with George to have this go to the next step. I will work with Ed because there'll be some additional services from Ed, obviously, because there's additional report, additional mitigation plan. There'll be some amendment to his contract, and I think we're best served both for us and the owner to make sure that that is quantified ahead of time rather than reactive, and we're dealing with hourly fees. It gets to be a little unwieldy for me, for the owner, et cetera. So we'll tackle that offline in the next few days so that you continue to have the consulting services from Mr. Pollock, but we also have it as a specified scope of services that are being provided so that there's no question as to how that's moving ahead. And that's all I have. Bob, you have any other thoughts?
No, I mean, I've got to think as to whether or not I want a hard copy or not. I mean, I've got enough paper here where I can print off a lot of pages, so I should be okay. You know, I've printed off a lot of the stuff already. But I'll give you a call if I need a hard copy or not. But I think I might be able to muddle through with printing them off myself. So that way I can pick and choose which pages I need more. I think are more important. So.
Okay. And I can also arrange a Zoom call with the commission. We can walk through the SharePoint site for those that want to do that. So that's another avenue.
Well, one thing I might suggest though is just to be on the safe side, resend the shared site to everybody, the link to the site.
Of course.
So instead of spending an hour and a half trying to find that one email.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep, and I'll add the new documents to it.
Okay.
Okay.
And when is our next meeting? Do we have a second one in December, or is it the next one in January?
Oh, it's January 6th.
Okay.
No, we're done for December.
Okay.
So yeah, so George, you've got a little bit of time. I'll work with Ed, and then we'll go from there. So if even if you obviously having it prior to the meeting, so Ed can react to it prior to the meeting is most beneficial. But at least come January, we can go back to 2 meetings. There'll be what are we? The first and third Wednesdays of January, February, March. Okay.
Sounds good.
All righty.
Thank you.
We'll close this matter out for this evening then. Thank you for Stanley, Bill, and George for joining us this evening.
Thank you, folks. Appreciate it. Have a great evening.
Good night, folks.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Right.
Is JRF still around?
Yeah, I think we lost them. Let's see if I can bring up. Get the right right plan, I think. Yeah, that's the wetlands one. And we do, I believe we have Phil Doyle ready to roll.
I'm here.
All right, Phil, this is it's your show. Why don't you go ahead and jump right in for us?
Can I ask you, Shannon, you sounds like you were busy today. Did you get the package that I sent over that had a set of plans to use specifically rather than use the EDC or the ADRC plans?
That's what's up.
That's what's up. Wonderful.
Yeah, this is your wetland presentation. I've got the ADRC presentation as well. Loaded in case there's questions. I figured I'd have it in case it's helpful, but what you're looking at is your wetland presentation that you asked for.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much for that.
Yes.
Just as an introduction, I am Philip Doyle, land planner. My office is over in Simsbury, and we are working on this project for co-developers. One of the developers is Abe Code, and he is online with us. And the other developer partner is with me in my office, and that's Jeff Scott. And Jeff is also the owner of the parcel. Jeff owns about 24.5 or almost 4.8 acres of land on Farmington Avenue. And it's adjacent to the Waterside 10. It's the area that's colored in yellow on the plan in front of you. And one of the neighbors actually is the Plant 17, the focus of this long discussion that you just had. A few years ago, I think we've been working on this project for 3 years. The town has had an idea to look at this entire area where Waterside 10 is, where our site is colored in the yellow, and where Plant 17 is located, to consider for a rezoning. And the Town Planning and Zoning Commission, you probably already know this, established a zone called the MDD zone, Midpoint Development District, because it's just about central in the town, north and south and east and west. And there is a separate section in the zoning regulations for the 3 sections of this property, of the overall property. Plant 17 is a separate section, the waterside area is a separate section, and our piece of the area is a separate section of the zoning regulations. And we are coming in to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a rezoning. We'd like to see the MDD zone established. The current zoning of the site is C1, basically light industrial, and BR, which is a retail business zone. And we'd like to see the town adopt the MDD zone. To do that, the regulations require we prepare a master plan. If the town Planning and Zoning Commission approves a master plan, at some point the developers would come back with, after they've had time to put the plans together, they would come in with with detailed site plans. So at this point, we have a master plan that we have been working on. We've submitted that, and it is not required that we come and have a conversation with the Inland Wetland Commission, but the staff has said to us, town staff has said to us, because you're along the river and you are going to have potential impacts in one way or another to inland wetlands, you ought to have an informal discussion with the Inland Wetlands Commission, and that's why we're here. We like to show you this, get some reaction. so that you are aware of what we are up to. And as we go forward into the process, then if you have comments, concerns, we'll be able to take those into account. So this was the location plan where we are located. The drawings, I think, are always set up the same way with Farmington Avenue to the north. The river is to the south. We've got about 1,600 linear feet of frontage on the river. Shannon, why don't you flip to the next sheet? This sheet is our existing condition survey. Yeah, stay up with this one just for a second, if you could. Shows Farmington Avenue on the top, the river on the bottom. The Farmington Heritage Canal Trail, the bike trail, is right there on the west side of the site. We've got about 1,600 feet of riverfront. There's a dark dashed blue line. That dashed blue line that runs, and you can kind of run your cursor down that line. That's the designated wetland area. The soils between that line and the river are the what I believe to be the hydric soils. Those soils have been identified by Malone and McBroom for wetland purposes. We've had those flagged, and we also have non-hydric alluvial soils on the site, and those will be discussed a little bit later by the consultants. There is also a floodplain on the property. Floodplain is shown in that dashed green line that's just behind the blue line. That's the 175 elevation of along the Farmington River for the 100-year flood. And for the most part, when you see our plan, we're staying behind all of these lines. The very light blue line running parallel to the river is the 150-foot upland review area. And what I've colored in pink are the various sewer easements, either storm sewers and or public sanitary sewers that have been built across the property over many, many years. The property, flip to the next one, keep going on, I'll try to finish quickly. When you drive past on Farmington Avenue, everybody has noticed the old McCallum building. Building built about 1924. I guess it was occupied as a grain factory, built by Winchell Smith at that point. And it has been pretty much underutilized since that period. It's a tough building to rehabilitate, solid concrete, 8-foot floor-to-floor ceiling heights in the upper floors, hard to use. And there's a series of other buildings on the property. There's a tin building, a metal building that sits forward of that was built in the 50s. And then there's a block building that was added to the south end of the McCallum building in the 70s or 80s. Recently, there's been a nice hot dog stand added to the property. So that's the developed portion of the site, and that is hard against the bike path. Then the next picture, if you could just flip to that next sheet, Shannon. The rest of the site, you have some views of the Farmington River. Those two pictures on the right show through the trees the Farmington River. That really is the feature of the property, views of the river. But unfortunately, this site has been subject to the same earthwork excavation that was discussed in a roundabout way on the previous cease and desist application. And that the site was, we have the old historic photographs, the site started to be disturbed in the 50s, and it looked like they drag lined the river and widened the river significantly, and took a great deal of sand out of this site and left the site pocketed. There's debris piles, and the site has been heavily revegetated with not only native trees, but invasive species. Let's flip on to the next one. The thought process when the town was looking at this parcel, one of the reasons that the town was interested specifically in this parcel is because it has languished for so many years. No one has ever been found an effective use for the Winchell Smith buildings that I just showed you, nor the rest of the property. There's 25 acres that are sitting there, underutilized, not performing. And at the same point, we've got the very heavily used bicycle path going north and south, right through there, Shannon. And the closest access points to that bicycle path now are down on the south by Red Oak Hill Road, almost a mile to the south. And then at the end of the industrial area, as you go north up Brickyard Road, again, almost a mile up. So there's no access to the trail. You have the major east-west connector of Farmington Avenue running between, Unionville and the village. The planning department had been hoping that a connection could be made at this site, and there is a blue line right there that runs down from the trail, the bike trail, along through this property easterly towards the village. And one of the conditions that has been put into the zoning is if the town approves, town planning and zoning commission approves a master plan for that site, that master plan has to include a connection to the bike path. And at this point, the town selected route for that bike path is to drop down southerly towards the river and then to generally run along the frontage of the property as it passes along the edge of the river, and then do two things. One would be if and when the Plant 17 property is ever built, a bike path would be extended through 17 over to the back of the temple. And then I think it is intended to connect back up to Farmington Avenue. We also show on this plan, the town plan, the town is looking for us also to connect up to Farmington Avenue to sidewalks built in that area, knowing, and I think that was intended because no one knew how long it was going to take to develop the trail through the Plant 17 property. So there are let's call it encumbrances, requirements that come with the master plan that devolve onto the developer that says, build a connection, build a trail. It's going to be about a half mile plus or minus of trail that will be built, plus the connection. So Shannon, let's flip to the next one. This is the master plan that we have at the moment. The bike trail is on the left, the existing bike trail. We'd be building a ramp system. We'd actually be proposing to lower the existing bike trail. It's about 30 feet above grade now. And we'd be dropping that down about halfway, 15 or 16 feet, so that we can make it handicap accessible down into the site. And then we'd follow the town master plan. And just as Shannon is drawing her cursor, we would be following a route along an existing old path and then taking the bike path down to the property line with Plant 17. The idea would be to get public views and public access to the water. And the reason I mentioned the bike path first is that's the primary amount of disturbance that we would have in closest proximity to the river, and or to a designated wetland, is the creation of the bicycle path. The bicycle path, as you move a little bit towards the west from where your cursor is, Shannon, that starting there all the way over to the existing bike path follows an old road that is that currently exists. So we build the bike path on that road. Other pieces of I would mention in the town master plan requirements. I had mentioned that the site is heavily covered with invasive species. One of the requirements in the MDD zoning, if it's applied to the site, would be we have to remove the invasive species. Another requirement in the MDD zone is that we have no direct discharges to the Farmington River. The site is very sandy, and we would be looking to infiltrate all of the stormwater. And Tom Daly, who's on the team, can explain that a little bit later. But we would have a master plan that tries to reinvigorate the existing McCallum complex. And then the zoning allows for the construction of multifamily housing, and we would be building that multifamily housing in a linear fashion down setback from the west where the bikewood path is over towards the east where our border is up against the Plant 17 property. We'd have 8 buildings. We'd have all the parking behind those buildings. There would be no parking out towards any of the resources, the wetland resources. And we try to be infiltrating all of the stormwater. We would have the edge of 4 buildings. You see the 4 closest residential buildings right there, 2, 3, 4 pieces of those buildings would be within 150 feet of either the river and or the wetland that's associated with the river. Can I just go to the next picture? I'd like to turn this over to Megan. I had mentioned her name in passing. Megan Raymond is with Tom Daly, and she has identified the wetlands on the site. It's in the report. Shannon may have shared the reports with you, but I think Megan can review what we have as wetlands, what we have as resources on the property, and then Tom can talk about how we have addressed or could address potentially drainage systems on the site.
Sure. Thanks, Phil. For the record, my name is Megan Raymond. I'm a professional wetland scientist and registered soil scientist with Mylona McBroom. And thanks very much for giving us your audience this evening. I know it's late, and just appreciate your time here. I flagged the wetlands on this property, as Phil indicated, just a little over 24-acre site in January of 2019. And there are two wetland systems on the property. Primarily, we have the high-value, high-functioning corridor along the Farmington River that occupies about 1,600 linear feet of frontage. The site abuts 1,600 linear feet of frontage on the north bank of the Farmington River. This wetland in this location, in the eastern segment of this wetland, we have a boundary that's generally coincident with the ordinary high water line. As you move to the west, we have it's almost actually kind of reflective of the manipulation of the river in this location, where the river hasn't been widened through sand and gravel mining. We have a wider floodplain and a wider poorly drained area, but where the river is quite wide and been disturbed through excavation, we have a very narrow wetland corridor in that location. So we're looking in green in this location, and that occupies, it's about 2.5 acres of wetlands, which would be federal wetlands, state wetlands, local wetlands along the river frontage here. In addition, what we have to the north of this, what we see in sort of this yellow color here, is I'm sorry, this message is just popping up. I see, or what we see is the Occam silt loam. We have 3 lobes of alluvial soils, just non-hydric alluvial soils out of the floodplain, out of the FEMA floodplain, no wetland functionality, occupied or vegetated with canopy species, upland vegetation, black oak, scarlet oak, those types of species. And they exist amidst a very disturbed landscape. And so that's why we only have these sort of native alluvial soils in 3 distinct lobes, because we have a lot of crisscrossing of eudorthants and a lot of manipulation of this ground surface over time, most notably adjacent to the river. As we get to the river, we see very steep berming, particularly in the east, and a lot of grading and manipulation that has occurred over time that has resulted in a distinct separation between the riverine components of the Farmington to the upland areas to the north. Although again, we have these alluvial patches that occupy about 5 acres on the property. As it relates to functionality, obviously we're looking at the Farmington River as a very high functioning wetland, as well as providing high wetland values, a lot of contribution to wetland values, be it recreation, vistas, importance to the community. There's a lot of wetland values that have great import here that can be maximized with a site development proposal. And that's what we're looking to do in laying out this plan and working on the team, is to maximize the functionality and maintain any functionality, obviously, along the Farmington River, while allowing expression through public interface with wetland values, with the public access component, with the trail extension. Similarly, as we're looking at this, we took a great deal, or look very closely at potential stormwater impacts with increases in impervious area. And I can turn it over to Tom Daly, who can describe that in a little bit more detail. But that is the general extent of wetland resources on the property that we're looking at, and just the site considerations that we're taking great care of in laying out potential development here. Thank you. On to Tom.
Sure. Shannon, keep going to the utility plan. You can go right past that. Thank you. So once again, for the record, Tom Daly with Milo and McBroom. As Phil indicated, the site has been manipulated over the years, and what that has resulted in is there's undulations throughout the site. While it's steep along the river, there's in the kind of the central area, it's generally flat, and most of that water percolates into the ground, and there's really not much evidence of any direct discharges from this site to the river. So our goal on the drainage plan was to try to mimic those existing conditions. As you can see, this plan, it's we're really trying to decentralize the stormwater. You know, on a traditional plan we've seen, you typically have maybe 1 or 2 basins. As you can see on this plan, we probably have over a dozen basins, bioswales, underground infiltration chambers, and really trying to spread out the drainage throughout the project, take advantage of Phil's layout that has created these kind of green pockets that we're going to take advantage of. In addition to that, this property is located in the aquifer protection area because, as you know, the wellhead for Connecticut Water is just, I guess, just to the east. They're looking for us to promote infiltration specifically from clean water from roofs. So we anticipate many of the buildings will go directly to underground chambers to promote infiltration. And then we think that parking areas, they'll probably go to more towards the biodepression and the stormwater basins, where we'll work with Megan and also Phil to develop a planting plan so we get a polishing of that stormwater before it actually gets into the ground and through infiltration. And then we're also going to probably daisy chain these basins. So one will flow into the next one to flow in the next one. And we think that kind of best management practice, or that chain of BMPs, will do a great job in terms of cleaning the water. But really the goal, as Phil indicated, is we're really going to try to contain almost all the flow on site with just high level overflows going to the river. With that, that's an overview of the drainage plan, and I think I'm going to pivot back to Phil to close us out.
Yeah, thank you, guys. We're now in the process of the application with planning and zoning. We have been in front of architectural design review for their comment, and we've met with economic development. And next week, I think it's on the 7th, we start a public hearing with planning and zoning to seek the MDD zoning designation. Our expectation is that probably at best it won't be until January that a decision might be made in this regard. We think that the town did a very good thing in promoting the MDD zone, because these sites have been difficult for anyone to have interest in. There would be public benefit that we would be creating in developing the trail connection. That's going to be very expensive. And the town recognized that, and they have built in an incentive that says we not only can maintain the commercial on the property, but we can also build housing. So they're hoping that there's an incentive for a developer to move forward with this. And if our plan is reasonable enough, we are hoping that probably for the first half at least of 2021, if we're able to get this approval perhaps in January, we'd be going into detail, putting the site plans, including the drainage and the utilities and the erosion control and the planting, so that we could come back to everyone maybe in the early summer. That's sort of the goal, and we'd certainly like to get your comments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Go back to Rich. Any comments?
No comments at this time.
Emily?
None for me right now. I'm interested in this project. I use that bike path stretch frequently, and yeah, I'm super interested in this. This is very interesting.
Dave?
I'm checking.
Dave still here?
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Also a heavy bike path user, probably daily, really. So interested in that portion of it. Also, I'd like to thank you for coming before us, even though you didn't really have to, unlike your neighbors to the east, who were not so diligent. No additional comments at this time.
Okay, Robert?
Well, it certainly looks like you've spent a lot of time already leading up to the design to date, so it looks like a pretty exciting plan overall. I do have one question. For the bike path, that's actually a pretty substantial change in grade. So I imagine the slope leading down to the low point is going to be still a pretty substantial grade. Was there an option to build a ramp parallel to the existing bike path, and that way you don't have to drop the grade? Was that considered?
Robert, this is Phil. Yeah, we looked at virtually every option you could imagine. If you use the bike path, I'm out on it all the time. So think about connections. In Connecticut, most of the bike paths are relatively close to grade, so that the connections are almost street level. The only connections that I can recall that have any substantial grade change are on the northern end of the bike path. Have you guys ever ridden up as far as Westfield? Up because if you take the trail up through Simsbury and East Granby, and you get up to Suffield, and then you get up to the town line. And for a long time, everybody said, well, the trail ended up by the Southwick town line. And I made the mistake at one point, maybe a year ago, out on a ride with some friends and my wife. And I said, oh yeah, I'm just going to go check things out a little bit, and I'll be right back. So my wife waited at the Southwick Suffield line. I kept riding and riding and riding, and all of a sudden I was up at the Westfield River, up in Westfield, about 15 miles beyond, and I knew my wife was going to be really pissed at me. And the reason I mention this is because I've gotten myself in trouble, but there I discovered that the trail is elevated as it is here over the site. If you've all ridden past this site, it's 30 feet higher than the site. So it takes a long, 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 long ramp. Now up there, they did ramps that were built in and abutted into the existing trail. And it's a difficult proposition. The ramps get very, very long. If you think about Collinsville, if you've ridden bikes, you've all gone over to Collinsville, you know two things. One is you've got that ramp that drops down to the trail that is actually on the Burlington side of the river that comes off the bridge. That's about a 15-foot grade change in about 150 feet. It's 10% ramp, and it comes to a 90-degree terminus, and it's difficult for families with kids. It's not handicap accessible. So we looked at the situation here, and we would need something like a 600-foot long ramp to get from the grade of the trail down to the site. And we actually very seriously studied that. Now, there's another part of this is that the town master plan for the bike trail, the plan that was up here, also shows that the town would like to build a connection to the park, the baseball fields, on the other side where the community recreation center is. So you've got two potential users, one on each side. So how do you do that? And we came up with a solution where we said, you know, it's probably going to be a balance in cost. It may even be cheaper, rather than haul in material and have to get geotechnical engineers involved to somehow wedge in ramps that are 600 feet long, if we want to make these handicap accessible, and we do, against the trail. Why don't we lower the trail? So we are proposing, and Bruce Sear has already informally gone to DOT behind the scenes, DOT rail guys, and they are not opposed to this. We're proposing to take and start a vertical curve both at the bridge, the bridge at the river, where Shannon has the cursor, and start another vertical curve right there at the bridge over Farmington Avenue. And we're going to put a sag in the trail, drop the trail down at 5%, put an intersection in right there. And we'll be able to take handicap ramp down into our site in a very short distance, only going to be about 150 feet. The town will be able to do the same thing on the other side. We've already done a sketch for the town to show how that can work to get into the town park. So long answer is we've done a lot of work at that behind the scenes. Bruce has already broached these subjects to the DOT. And we think right now we can make this one of the only grade transits that actually is going to be at 5% and will be handicap accessible. So it's, and what we hope in doing all of that is that not only people will be able to use it, the general public, but think about what happened to Collinsville after the trail was built. Collinsville sort of boomed as a little economic center. The McCallum buildings have sat here half occupied. And I say only half because the school board has storage in 2 of the floors of the buildings. Other than that, there's only the auto parts place on the first floor. We're hoping that plus the development of some housing connected with sidewalks and driveways and all the rest, that brings life to these buildings and helps start to generate some interest here to really do some renovation in a very serious way. So it's been a major focus of attention. And one other thing I'd like to say is on the plan that Shannon put up, our colored site plan, there is a peninsula of land that is sticks into the river. It's a remnant of the excavation, maybe, yes, right where Shannon's cursor is. It's not a wetland. It's the high point down on the river. When I say high point, it's 4 feet up. And it is people have used it over time as a canoe and a kayak launch. And it actually has a carpet covering on the east side, right near where the cursor is, where I guess over time people have put in canoes and things. And we would probably, when we come to you for a real application, would be proposing to put temporary, during the summer, kayak racks for the people who are living here, pull them out during the winter or high water time. But we'd like to have people be able to sit down there and use that as a passive recreation spot and be able to take their kayaks and launch their kayaks into this flat water section of the river, so that the river could be used for recreational purposes. You know that the town boat building, the crew building, is almost, I'm being a little bit extensive with my language, it's almost across the river from us. It's probably downriver from us by 400 feet, but it's very, very close. So people do use this section for rowing, and we would like to be able to have people have access for kayaks and canoes. And I think that's probably
Thank you, Phil.
act on the river at this point.
That's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mark?
And I will talk about the bike path too. So what you're saying is what you're going to do is make a gradual dip into the trail, and then it would come back up again to make contact with the bridge, I assume, right?
Correct.
What's that?
Absolutely correct.
So how long, this is not under our jurisdiction, this is just informational purpose for me. How long would that process take, and would it happen at a time when the bike path is probably used least, like maybe in the, this time of year towards spring, or, just curious how long it would take and when would you plan to do that work?
It's a real good question. It would obviously means for some period of time shutting down this section of the bike path. It would have to be shut down from up at the top end of Brickyard Road or down by Red Oak Hill Road. And you can only pave during warmer seasons. It might make more sense to do it as you're suggesting at a low use period during the winter, and then pave it first thing in the spring and open it up, because most of the bike path is not maintained and plowed during the winter time. So your suggestion is probably a very good one, and that's probably what we would be doing.
Okay, I mean, it's not our jurisdiction or whatever, anything, but I was just curious about the whole process. It's very intriguing what's being proposed, and that's the only questions I have.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion.
Thank you. Ned?
Yeah, it looks like a very interesting project and very ambitious. Just, my daughter does crew, and I'm looking at that little section of bike trailway kind of close to where you said is a kayak ramp there.
Yep.
Yeah, and then that section that goes where the river starts to widen out. I'm thinking like if you could combine like crew viewing areas in that area, because I know in I think it's Glastonbury, they have a huge crew area for watching crew races on the river, and I don't think we would want, we're obviously not getting anything that extensive, but just to keep in mind that maybe an area where we have some staggered slopes or something that people could watch crew races might be another focus point that people would use the area for.
All a possibility. Yeah, right along that edge of the river. The path is, I think we've got the path set back about 20 feet from the edge of the bank. I know when the town first formulated the bike path plan, they were hoping that where the river indents here, that there would be views that the public would be able to have from the bike path of the river. The idea was to make a visual contact so people were aware that the river was present, and it had a different sense than the other portions of the river. The rest of the river averages only about 200 feet wide, and depending on where it is, it could either be rocky or it could be relatively flat. But this is a unique part of the river where it's so broad. It's almost like a lake. And that was the plan. Now, one of our concerns has been in adjacency to the river is you don't want people leaving the path and destabilizing the bank and trying to climb down the banks. So part of our thought had been is to leave a little bit of a berm, so that might be 3 feet high in that 20 feet. So when you're riding along on your bike, you can't just ride your bike over to the river edge. We want to have a little bit of a berm, and we want to have that planted with low growing plant material so that people can easily see the river, but not be encouraged to go to the bank and cause a problem with the bank. So it's when we come back to you with site plans, and hopefully we will be able to do that if we have the plan approved, the master plan approved. That's the kind of thing we've got to talk about. What's the relationship that we want to have with people and the river?
Yeah, but it is lake-like in that area. I mean, as you know, in sections of the river where it narrows down, you get the flows are very swift and cause, you know, and can cause scour and erosion problems. But I think at that area there, especially since it's an artificial kind of, as you say, indentation away from the natural bank of the river, from the old excavations, that, you know, I wouldn't think that the erosion is too tough to control in that area. But I understand that you don't want people accessing the river there, but you want them to be able to enjoy it. But and I think you'll be fine. Like, I'm just thinking of something like having a wider area of the trail, so that, or a divider or something, that if people want to watch the crew races, they could watch them from there, but maybe not get access down to the river.
Well, the other thing you can do, you see it even up on top of the trail now as it runs across past our property. You can install the 3 rail split rail fence, and
right.
that can act as your barrier, and people can also, you know, use that to lean against.
Yeah, but great project. Thank you for taking the time to give us a heads up, and so that, you know, we are better prepared when we do have to make decisions on for the inland wetlands.
Yep.
Aye.
I have no questions at this time. Sounds like a fascinating project.
Shannon, can you go back to the map showing the wetlands?
Yeah, that's one of the first.
The first one.
The first. This one?
Yeah. I'm a little confused in terms of you're identifying wetland limits, but yet the FEMA flood elevation is at 175. That's the green.
Yep.
The thing is how the definition of wetlands is poorly drained, very poorly drained, alluvial, and floodplain. How did you delineate the wetlands down lower towards the river when the FEMA flood elevations in the green?
Sure.
Yeah.
So can you hear me? It's Megan Raymond, wetland scientist with Mylona McBroom. So the definition that you decided with the general statute as it relates to Connecticut wetlands, poorly drained, very poorly drained, alluvial or floodplain soils. And so it's that distinction. Not every floodplain has is reflective of floodplain soils. To have actual floodplain soil development, you need to have a lot of deposition, which is actually you did have historically in this area, given that we have mapped floodplain or mapped alluvial soils even up gradient of this federal boundary. So what you have along this wetland limit here is the portions of the site that are reflective of basically three parameters: hydrophytic vegetation, hydric soils, and hydrology with the nexus to the river. When you move up gradient of that, this whole area has been really disturbed and worked over, and the soils within this area are not alluvial soils anymore. They're eudorthants. They've been manipulated. They've been moved. They've been there's been fill brought in, and a lot of excavation actually from the river itself has been dumped on and bermed up. So we don't have alluvial soils in that specific location, just up into that, in that interface between the blue line and the green line in this location. We do have alluvial soils in those three lobes on the soil map or on the wetland map that we showed a few slides further. We do have some alluvial soils in this location, but you're not going to tie a line or have a coincident boundary between the FEMA floodplain and a wetland in this site, given past disturbances and the characteristics that we're seeing out there.
No, I can appreciate what you're saying there, but we need to go by what the statutory definition of a wetland is.
Yeah.
And if there are alluvial soils, then the 150-foot setback area just appears to be larger than what you're showing on the mapping. I mean, I'm not trying to criticize the plan at all, because I think it's a well laid out plan.
Right.
But I just want to make sure that, assuming this gets through planning and zoning, and you have to come back to us for an application, I just want to make sure that the application we see deals with wetland soils based on state definition.
Exactly. And that's, so these three lobes will have 150 foot. I mean, basically, I mean, there's direct disturbance of non-hydric alluvial soils with this project, because that's what constitutes these 5 acres in the central portion of the site. But so that will all be quantified and accounted for properly with the application. But as it relates to the river and the floodplain, that was the explanation for that.
Okay, no, that's fine. I appreciate that. But that's something I want you to be aware of, when you deal with that. The other thing that I will say is, based on at least what I saw on the plans, it doesn't look like you have any plans to put anything in the floodway. And all I can say is thank you. So yeah, no, I mean, good luck with the plan. I mean, I think it shows you put a lot of time and effort into it. So there's some really great aspects about this. So, good luck with planning and zoning, see what happens there. But I'll echo what some of the other people said. Thank you for coming in first and at least giving us a heads up as to what it is you're proposing. Sometimes that helps. So.
Yep. No, we appreciate your time. And the proximity to the wetlands, it's sort of like a double-edged sword. There's a wonderful resource, and this property actually has value because of its proximity to the river, but you have to be very sensitive about that. And that's what we're trying to balance. So I'm sure you'll keep us honest as we go through the process, but we are trying to respect that, because we believe that does create the value for the site.
No, I think everybody understands what you're saying on that. So I want to thank you for coming in, spending some time with us, and giving us an idea of what we may see down the road.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll see you guys on Monday night. I will.
Yeah.
Take care, Shannon. Bye.
Have a good night.
Good night.
All right.
Do you have anything in planners report?
No.
Okay. I'm just going to make this easy. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the November 18th Inland Wetlands special meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any comments, corrections? Hearing nothing. Those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining?
This is Mark Alstein.
Okay. So we'll adjourn this meeting on December 32nd.
December 2nd.
It just feels like we're like the 30th, 31st.
You're right. It does.
That's where I was going with it. And we'll call the Conservation Commission meeting to order based on the clock on my computer is 10:30. Other business land acquisition committee report.
Yep, and that got emailed out to everyone. It looks like at least the public portion of the meeting was relatively light, so not a lot to discuss. We're going to continue to hold on that property across the street. Given that there's been on and off interest in the property from a development standpoint, I'm not comfortable putting that on the land acquisition list in the absence of it being brought forth from the property owner. We've had a number of interactions with the property owner, and I'm just, it's going to stay put unless I am strongly told otherwise. So that's the only thing that I think was up for public discussion. There was a fairly lengthy executive session, but I think that's it, really.
Okay.
So we're going to just leave that stand, like I said, unless I'm directed otherwise.
Okay, anything on planners report?
No.
Okay, so can I get a motion to approve the minutes of November 4th, 2020 Conservation Commission meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any comments, corrections? Hearing nothing, those in favor say aye.
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 Against? And I will abstain because I wasn't there for various reasons. I think that'll do it tonight, folks. I thank you for managing to stick through this whole thing. And I do want to, wish everybody a happy holiday. Be safe. Hopefully your family is safe as well. And don't forget to come back in January.
Oh yeah, please come back in January.
Which year are you talking about?
Please. And I'll
32nd.
All right, nice try. And I'll get information out to everyone on 1179. We'll get that SharePoint link so it's at the top of everyone's email.
Okay.
Thank you.
And hey, Shannon.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure that it's on the shared site. Is the 2017 letter that was drafted to the owner?
The email from Bill Warner. Yes.
And is that on there?
It's been a while since I uploaded everything, Bob, so I'm
If it's not,
absolutely, I'll make sure it's there.
well, I'm just saying if it's not, if you could send that to everybody.
Sure.
I think that may help clarify some things.
Sure.
The owner knew.
The owner knew. The owner knew. So, and that's, like I said, we can, at some point, yeah, the owner knew, it's there in writing. We walked the site. At some point, we got to get let's get it restored. Let's get the mitigation in place and make sure you folks get, what you need. But as far as any grand vision, they've mentioned plans that the town has. Anything I've seen, it dates back to like the 80s or 90s, and it was being done on like trace paper. Nothing of any substance.
There's a reason why this site has not been developed.
Oh, they've been busy excavating the heck out of it for a while, but yes.
The site just has to be more compatible for development. Maybe that was the incentive.
Details.
Yeah, minor details. No,
Those pesky wetlands.
yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll close it up, folks. But again, have a safe and happy holidays, and hopefully you actually get to see some of your family.
Great Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everyone.
Okay.
Merry Christmas.
Holidays.
Take care.
Happy holidays.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.